Good morning, everyone. We're just hanging on at the moment for the live stream to be going. Okay, the live stream is now going. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the People and Health Scrutiny Committee of the 10th of January. Thank you all for coming this morning. It's a horrible day out there, so thank you for making the effort to come. If we can go on to apologies, please. Do we have any apologies, please, George? So.
Good morning. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Nick Ireland.
Thank you. Have I got any declarations of interest, please? Okay, thank you. If anybody has got any declarations of interest that they'd like to make during the meeting, please feel free to add them and we'll put them into the minutes for a record. If I can confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 8th of November, please, are there any comments? Okay, could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Pipe, and a seconder, Councillor Ridout. And a vote on the minutes, please. Thank you very much. That's approving the minutes. Chairman's updates. There aren't a lot of chairman's updates today. The only one that I would like to bring to your attention, you should have had an email within about the last week or so about a meeting in Bournemouth. This should be quite an interesting one. Please read it and please respond to it. And as many of us as possible go over. When we've got numbers, we can sort out cars and drive in, but we have got allocated parking over there. Public participation. Is there any public participation? Any questions?
No, there's no public participation.
Thank you. And members' questions? Do we have any members' questions?
No, there's no questions from councillors.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of non-committee members here, and you'll be welcome to speak during the agenda items. What I will do on this, because it's a budget setting, I'm going to go first of all to committee members, but I am going to be fairly relaxed about any sort of questioning that we have, particularly around the budget, because what I don't want to do is to be going backwards and forwards. So if committee members are asking on a specific topic that other members would like to come in on, please let us know and you can be taken at that stage. Otherwise, if we leave your questions until at the end, that would be really useful. Urgent items, we have no urgent items. So if we can go straight to item 8, corporate complaints team. And we've got a short presentation by Anthony Bygrave. Thank you. If I can hand over to you, that would be really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Councillors. Happy New Year to you all from the complaints team. I think a few key messages just to share with you. I saw that the Echo reported quite recently and they picked out the increase over 2 years in terms of formal complaints, and quite rightly, we've had 100% increase in complaints over a 2-year period. We're living very much in the here and now. It's sort of coming to the end of Q3, and it's really interesting to look again at the figures and the trends of last year. And I think we felt that 2021, the key COVID year, I think we felt that that was going to be perhaps a blip based on sort of people's circumstances and external pressures and maybe a lack of opportunities to do things that normally enrich one's life. And as a result, we were seeing quite a lot more correspondence through our inboxes. What 21-22 has told us is that wasn't really the case. The complaints continued to increase across the board. There's a 14% uplift. But what I would really like to point out, and I think is vitally important, is of those 1,406 complaints that came to the team, is actually a reduction in formal complaints that we dealt with formally, that followed a formal process. So I think we should be heartened by that. I think the key message from us is if we can resolve it, let's resolve it. If team managers and locality managers can pick up the phone early, that's something that we're really trying to do. So I think that the biggest thing to celebrate is the response that we get from the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman we have a tremendous relationship with. I think Dorset Council probably are the envy of a lot of the UK with the relationship that we enjoy. Bearing in mind that our corporate complaints went to a single stage process last year, one would assume that there's a reputational risk and that potentially could increase. We cut a stage from the formal complaints process. But what it has done is it meant that complaints were dealt with robustly, thoroughly, and the general public had the opportunity to escalate to the Ombudsman earlier than normal. And it's really heartening to see that the Ombudsman have upheld such a small proportion of our overall complaints. Yet 20 upheld complaints isn't ideal, and we should always aspire to having no administration whatsoever. But I think realistically, it's always likely that complainants will pursue things to an end, and I think it's right and proper. So we welcome the Ombudsman's findings. And I think crucially of those 20 upheld complaints, although there was maladministration and some financial recompense, there was no public report at that point. There was nothing that we would consider to be genuine reputational damage risk. You'll notice from the report a lot of the upheld complaints were in and around SEN matters and children out of education. We continue to work really closely on promoting learnings in that area and enjoy a really good relationship with Children's Services. I've never seen so much commitment in getting things right from an area, and I'd like to personally take this opportunity to thank the director and locality managers that are working really hard to try and stem the flow of complaints. And I think it is a trend of complaining because it becomes quite a sensitive area, and I think there's a lot of scrutiny on that area, and it can be quite challenging. So I'm really grateful to see the improvements this year. And we're very much living in the here and now, halfway through this year, well, beyond that now. And I can tell you a sneak preview of next year's annual report. It will say that complaints have gone up again, and it will say that the Ombudsman findings of administration are really low. So I hope you've had an opportunity to have a look at the report. You'll see that another key message would be in and around timescale, considering complaints have increased 100% over 2 years, only 18% going over our timescale compared to 39% last year, I think is a tremendous effort from everybody involved in resolving complaints. Of those complaints that have gone overdue, we do communicate that really clearly, so we don't compound matters. We make it clear that there's going to be a delay. We explain the reasons why. And you'll see that the volume of upheld complaints is proportionately low. And if we're honest, I think the reason the formal complaints have actually dropped and the informal resolution has risen, it's because I think a lot of the time the complaints process is really accessible, and that's a really good thing. But sometimes people are missing the opportunity to actually go directly to services and see if there is a quicker, less formal way of resolving concerns. We're trying to promote that this year. It hasn't worked. I think people see a button with complain written on it, and quite rightly, I'd do it too, if I'm honest. You think that's the quickest way of getting a result. It isn't always. But we are still promoting an informal resolution wherever possible, and I think Dorset Council should be really proud with that proactive approach. My final comment would be to end on a song, really, to draw everybody's attention to the compliments. I don't think we're seeing as many compliments as we're actually getting. I think Dorset Council have got a little bit of work to do across the board in celebrating. We're really good at reacting to problems, and we're really good at learning. We're really good at holding our hands up if things have gone wrong. I'm not sure that we're brilliant at saying, look, everybody, how brilliant we've done. And I think that's a shame. Certainly during COVID, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we were inundated with goodwill. That quickly dried up, I'm afraid. But we're still getting some good news messages through, and there is a lot of genuine warmth and sincerity from the general public. I don't think we're very good at sharing that. across the teams, and it's not all bad news. It really isn't. So let's report the good news as efficiently as we do the negative. That's probably about it for me. I can take any questions. I will go on forever if you don't stop me.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll stop you there then. Councillor Ridout.
That one. Ah, thank you. Sorry, I forgot now to use the microphone. Yeah, thank you for that very in-depth report, Anthony. It has been difficult times for Dorset Council to be operating under. I know from pharmacy that during COVID people were quite nice to staff, but post-COVID, for some reason, they seem to be a little bit more grumpier. Maybe they just haven't got the patience anymore. But well done on the 380 compliments in difficult times. I do have one little concern from the report. It's around children making complaints. And I notice only 8 children have actually made complaints. Mostly it's their parents, I guess, and their carers. But why is this? I mean, there's a new provider, the National Youth Advocacy Service. How do the children sort of know about this? Are they regularly contacted by these people, this service? And I say children generally aware that they can make comment themselves. And what sort of age are we talking? Thank you.
Actually, I'll answer the best I can. This report is very much based on the last financial year, and I know that I think we shared the concerns that Children's Services had, that the voice of the young person wasn't always being heard through the complaints process. But I think we need to be clear that it's not that the voice of the child isn't being heard. I think it's being heard loud and clear, but more at social work level, and there's a proactive desire to resolve complaints before they become formal complaints. There has been changes in advocacy. The numbers are really low. I don't think it's through a lack of an awareness that one can complain. I think there's probably a variety of reasons why young people don't want to follow a formal process, whether it's the formality itself, whether it's a fear of, if I complain, is it going to sort of put a mark against me as, you know, being naughty. I need to be careful how I sort of phrase it, but I think, as anything, prevention is better than cure, and I think the work that we do to resolve complaints without it becoming a formal complaint is really heartening. There probably is a bit of work to do with Children's Services still, to make sure we're capturing the learnings from things that could have been a complaint that perhaps haven't been complaints because of the good work that's been done to prevent it. So there probably is some work to be done there, if I'm honest. But you're quite right, and it is a very low number, isn't it, that of actually young people complaining directly. Certainly for around children's social care, we see quite a lot of complaints from estranged parents that perhaps are using a process not as it was intended when it was sort of put in place, my own personal view. And it's not always something that we can change an outcome for, but yeah, certainly the message is loud and clear. This year in particular, we're sort of working to make sure that that's as transparent as possible, and it's not actually a failing if you want to complain, and it's not something to be afraid of. But that good work still carries on behind the scenes to proactively prevent the complaint escalating unduly. I've realised I've probably gone on a bit there. Does that answer the question?
I was just concerned that children maybe aren't being listened to. Their voice isn't being listened to, perhaps. But as you explain, if the complaint can be sort of resolved earlier in the process, it doesn't become a formal complaint. But I think maybe there is some work to be done in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just bring Claire Shields in? Could you introduce yourself as well, please, Claire? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Claire Shields. I'm the Corporate Director for Commissioning and Partnerships in Children's Services, and just wanted to pick up your question really about do children, young people know about the service for advocacy and how we can make that happen. So absolutely, and you can see the number of referrals to advocacy in the report, and we do seek to resolve some of those complaints. But when children come into our care, we let them know that the advocacy service is there and how to contact that. We make some proactive approaches to that, and the advocacy services visiting team meetings and making sure that we're getting that information out there in leaflets in the ways that children and young people can understand and know how to use it. Yes, we do seek to resolve them informally where we can, but we would like to hear some more voices coming through as well. So it's something we keep an eye on, but as part of our quality assurance of that contract, we monitor reach, who they're talking to and what that looks like. And the Corporate Parenting Board gets an annual report from the advocacy service as well and provides some scrutiny in there as well.
Okay, thank you. Could I go to Councillor Pipe now, please?
Thank you, Chairman. As my colleagues already said, it's nice to see that close on 400 compliments overall. Educate somebody who lacks the knowledge. What's the actual difference between a formal and an informal complaint? What's the dividing line that makes it one or the other? And I have a question afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's the golden question, isn't it? I think I've sat here in the times I've represented Dorset Council in these committees, and I think that's a question that crops up every time. And I think it's very much that I don't think there's a one rule fits all. Sometimes it can come down to whether or not a complaint is resolvable, whether or not a complaint is vexatious, whether following a process is right and proper, whether there's a quick win, as much as I hate that expression, by acting proportionately and quickly to resolve issues. So and I think sometimes people do use the complaints function to request a service because in their mind, and I'd probably do this too if I'm honest, if you're looking for swift action, you're complaining. But in actual fact, when you actually read through the complaint form, it can be, can somebody just help me please? And we want to help people, and I don't think that is a formal complaint. It's come through a complaints channel, so we do think it's important to separate it out. So when you're actually talking about genuine formal complaints, it's a complaint about a service they've received. So I can see, I know there's follow-up questions, so perhaps I'll pause there and see if I can elaborate.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you, Chairman. Why does it seem that 23% on average of complaints to children's social care and 29% of complaints to adult social care were deemed to be overdue in their finalisation, I suppose? And how does that compare to previous years? And by previous years, I mean maybe let's go back to the year which would have been the half COVID and non-COVID, if you could.
And I think the key thing for children's and adult social care complaints is it's a statutory timescale. The adults' timescale is a little bit more generous, so we adhere to our own complaints process and ask for 20 working days where possible, and that's sometimes difficult to achieve. And for children's services, because the pressures on the service, it's sometimes difficult to meet those timescales. But they are statutory. And in answer to your query, it's actually an improvement in terms of the timescale, and I can tell you that it's improved dramatically this year. I know this is a report for last year, but in the here and now, this is a trend that's improved a great deal. So hopefully councillors and members can be assured that that's something that's moved very much in the right direction. There was no doubt that during COVID we were absolutely swamped, and social care in particular there was a real demand for emergency, and in some cases, life-saving responses. So, yes, forgive us for any overdue complaints during that period.
Thank you. If I could go to Councillor O'Leary, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. In regard to the compliments, I think it's one thing to note that you're far more likely with most things to get complaints than compliments. I think any time I've ever looked at anything that's a government body and it comes up on the internet with the reviews first, they always have 1 star, 2 star, because people are far more likely to register a negative experience than they are a positive experience. But in regards to compliments, which is a good statistic, what do we regard as a compliment? How do we register what is a compliment and what isn't? If someone rings up and we deal with their council tax query or something, and they say, "Thank you very much for your help," is that a compliment, or is it something? I mean, I saw on our social media the other day someone left a "Thank you Dorset Council" thing written in the snow or something. How do we register what a compliment actually is on a formal basis to register it in these statistics?
Thank you. I'll answer that, Chair, if I may. There is an online compliment form that we receive, so people do follow, again, a process, a very positive and welcome process, but it's still something which people can freely complete themselves. We tend to also accept compliments that are received by the services, so usually heartfelt thanks, copies of cards that have been sent in. Certainly for adults services, we see a lot of scanned cards just saying thank you, and it's just a lovely thing that people have gone out, they've spent money just to make their voice of positivity heard. So we don't include sort of hearsay accounts of, if a member of staff was to say somebody was really pleased with my work today, we wouldn't really count that. But if we've got something that sort of has come from the heart of a member of the public to recognise a job well done, I think it's vitally important that we recognise and celebrate that.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe? Sorry. Yeah, Councillor Pipe first and then Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. With the children in care complaints, from 2018-19 we had 20 complaints, and it's gone down consistently with a little blip, I suppose, in 2021, and 2021-22 it's down to 8. Now that's quite a significant drop in complaints. Is that because we're getting better at looking after our children in care so that we don't attract any complaints, or is it because we have very much less numbers of children in care from 2018-19 to 2021-22?
Yeah, to answer that, if I may. Really good point. I think percentage-wise, it's actually would appear quite a big difference, but in terms of actual numbers across the year, I don't think that's a very high number personally. So it's not necessarily indicative of a massive improvement in service. Working as closely with children's services as I do, I know that it is, and I know that we are better corporately at looking after children in care. But in terms of the numbers, the reduction, I wouldn't necessarily take a tremendous amount of stock in the percentage of variance, because it might only be 10 complaints over the course of a year. So I'm not sure that that's a tremendous figure. But it does follow the suspicion that the sentiments are more positive than they were certainly when I first started. And I think we fly the flag for excellence. And it is starting to show in the complaints year on year. But as I say, if you go back 3 years, I don't think that was a very high number anyway. And I think the question is, are children feeling that they can complain freely to the local authority? And that if they do know, they're certainly not. I wanted to just pick up quickly on the question earlier as well. We've put a fast track in for this year. So if young people want to complain, they don't have to go through so many steps. It's like, I've got a complaint, it will come straight in. So, you know, we're doing everything we can to make things as user-friendly as possible, but we're still not really seeing tremendous volumes. So I go back to the fact that we're resolving things informally and enjoy a better relationship, rather than it being so perhaps formulaic. I'd also say that the relationship with advocacy seems to be better as well. I think when I first started, the advocate would very much, not always, sort of seem to act in the best interests, but sometimes it became very formal and not always helpful. And I think the advocate wants a common sense resolution as well as Children's Services and Dorset Council now. So we're probably seeing that a little bit in the figures, but the figures are still really low. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's been a number of comments of a similar vein from other councillors. I thought it'd be helpful, and particularly Councillor Pipe helpfully draws our attention to the fact that the figures he refers to, 2018-19, of course, do refer to the predecessor authority, Dorset County Council, and the period of time before we underwent the wholesale restructuring of children's services under the Blueprint for Change model and our move to locality working. But what I did want to reassure councillors is that both of this scrutiny committee, but both the work of the Corporate Parenting Board, the virtual schools, the care leaving team, the PAs to our children in care and everybody else associated with our looked after children under our corporate parenting responsibilities, we make it absolutely clear we want to hear their voices. Their voices not only will be heard, they will be acted upon. And we will be providing that information as we do today here in Council. But I certainly welcome the fact that the formality of complaint that we've seen, that drop from 20 to 18, is a positive and I think does reflect some of the great work that we've seen going on inside the Directorate. But I also take Tony's point, and I know he says that complaints are a good thing to us because, of course, it does give us an opportunity for further learning and that belief that we should never rest on our laurels.
Thank you. Could I go to Councillor Cook, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. What I'm going to ask really cuts a little bit of what Councillor O'Leary said in regard to compliments. But, you know, with complaints, they're going to be a fact of life with us, whatever the organisation or business we're in. We can't get away from that. And I think if you're in any business or operation where there are no complaints, then I would be very, very suspicious. So it's good that we look at this. It's a shame it's pretty historical now. You know, we're talking about 9 months ago figures. I would be interested in what the trend is now, but that's not basically my question at the moment, but I see how we're going. But it's in terms of compliments. Indeed, they're, as you've said in the report, they're always harder for people to make a compliment as opposed to a complaint. And on the very detailed table there, I see we've got learning from our complaints, or opportunities, as I prefer to call them. Do we get learning from our compliments as well? So looking at areas where we've done well, do we continue to apply that and perhaps expand it?
No, thank you for that question. Yes, I think that there's equally as much opportunity to learn from a compliment. I think what we tend to see through the compliments channels is genuine, heartfelt warmth and thanks. There probably is more work that we should do to look behind what led to that, and if that's something that we could celebrate more formally through the report. So I think that's a really good point to take away. Yes, there is learning, and there probably is more work to dig out what led to the compliment that probably isn't being done.
Can I just come in on that one? I think, looking at this, what worries me is the title, because it's Corporate Complaints Team Annual Report. It's not just complaints, and I wonder whether it's possible to give consideration for changing the name slightly. I think one of the things that I always get quite concerned about is when I pick the Echo up and they say, this is the number of council complaints. And they've picked it up from basically picking up from the title of what's this paper, and they've just picked up the complaints rather than gone into any depth on them. And I just wondered whether it's possible to have some consideration about the name of the team, whether it could be customer feedback, resident feedback, something like that. So it actually encompasses the compliments as well as the complaints, and starts bringing out more of the compliments that we have, because we do a really good job. Yes, and as Councillor Cook said, there'd be something wrong with an organisation that there wasn't complaints coming in, and complaints are good because of the learning. But we also have to celebrate what we do well, and that's something that we don't do well enough at the moment. So that's just an observation. If we could possibly think about that. I don't know who to ask that to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark here. I'm the service manager for assurance. So Tony and the complaints team work to me. So I think there is Tony may come in a bit and follow up on it. I think one of the things we were toying with in the early days actually was rephrasing the name of the team to the learning from complaints team, which provides that sort of more of a positive angle to it. I think it's a fair point. We can certainly take that away. I think we can take that away in terms of the title of the report. I think the only question on it, and I might pass it to Tony for clarification, is with regards to the statutory nature of that report as to whether or not that impacts on the title.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, it is a statutory report. So I'm afraid we're a little bit limited. I agree that from I really like learning from complaints team. I'm not sure everybody did, but I thought it had a better, more positive, I won't say spin, but it certainly had a better message rather than it being a wholly negative experience. I think for the general public as well as Dorset Council, that the culture of learning shouldn't ever be lost. But in terms of the name of the report, it kind of has to be called that. But I think it's really important to capture the compliments as well, just as a balanced critique of the services we're providing.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Councillor Rennie now, please.
Thank you. I think one of the things as well, you've just said, is capturing the compliments. And I think we've heard a lot within the children's team and the adults team around growing and supporting our staff. And this word complaint, no, I'm going in the wrong direction. If you are complimenting people and you're able to share that with the staff, that helps that warm feeling that we all have. And I think as Englishness is, we sort of tend to go, oh, it's okay, it's okay. Whereas actually, we sometimes lose the real meaning behind the compliment. And I'm interested in your words around, we maybe could look at why that complaint. Was it so unusual for somebody to say, thank you for that, when we maybe as teams think that that's quite normal service? So maybe that's something to explore a little bit more. And even ourselves think about, why do we say thank you? Because we've looked before through the dashboard about staffing levels. And we saw something today in the headlines that we get on the internet about the issues around staffing. We've still got it. So maybe as a scrutiny committee, that is maybe something we can revisit at a later date. And some of the complaints talk about timeliness. And again, picking up Belinda's point during COVID, and everybody's expecting us now to be straight on the point, and we're not, because we're playing catch-up continually. And some of our staff are still struggling as well, and we're not all where everybody expects us to be when they want us to be. And I think that's part of it. A complaint sometimes comes because nobody's where you want them to be at that exact moment when you are feeling let down by somebody. So I think maybe again, it's looking further, a little bit deeper into the staffing situation as well, and to be helpful for the teams. I've always believed negotiation helps to get a complaint into a different field altogether. And I think we're all, and councillors have a great role to play in that as well. When somebody phones you up, we all know as a councillor, heavens above, they say, well, I left you a message 2 days ago. You know, where were you? Well, do you know, I'm sorry, I've not been well, you know. And I think that this is what we've got to realise more, and thank the teams for all the work they're doing, as well as the complaints, because the complaints team must love it when they see the compliments as well. Because if I was dealing with complaints every day, that would be very wearing. So I think well done to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the point we want to get across as well, that our teams are doing a really good job. If I can just go to Councillor Parry now.
Yeah, sorry. Just reflect very much on what Councillor Rennie said there, and very supportive of her comments. I mean, really, if we can find a way of wording this as corporate communication reports, that's really what we're talking about here. It's the communication to and from our residents that would help frame this in a much more balanced way, I think, rather than that negativity of the word complaint, which I'm afraid, whichever way we look at it, has a negative connotation.
Okay. We could put that in as a formal recommendation, or would you be happy to take that on board from your angle?
No, we're certainly happy to take that away and see if we can rephrase it in a more positive way. As I say, there is a statutory requirement for us to deliver the complaints information, but how we word it, I suspect we could, we've got a little bit of flexibility with that. And I'd just like to thank everybody really for the efforts that the councillors do, because the complaint numbers are as low as they are, I think, because quite often councillors get called in with formal complaints and are able to move towards common sense outcomes without the need for undue escalation. So without being overly charming, I really do appreciate that on behalf of the team. We realise that councillors do cover quite a lot of complaints without it getting to a complaint. So thank you for your input with that.
Okay, I was just winding up, but I think I've got one more question. Councillor Orell?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, good report. I like the granular detail provided later on, so page 15 onwards. I looked at so these are the complaints upheld and action points. I'm looking for themes. The theme that occurred to me was communication. Seems to come up quite a bit. So I noticed some of the action points involve getting more social workers, more actual workers. I wonder if we've got enough management support, admin, underneath these teams, because if we're missing kind of deadlines on communications, from experience, I'd depend on a secretary or an admin person saying, come on, you should have done this referral letter. Have we got enough admin support for our social workers to make sure they hit the deadlines?
I think that could be something we can pick up, or we've got corporate directors. Would anybody like to comment on that one, please?
Thank you, Councillor Orell. I would reassure you that in partnership with our complaints team, we rigorously track everything within an inch of its life. Sadly, that doesn't always mean, and some delay can be right. Some delay can be actually about making sure that we really find out what's happening here. I absolutely would want to concur that much of the things that we've learnt about over the years, which is why we are seeing a drop-off in our complaints, is about people just wanting to have a very quick response. And we have a standard within Children's Services that any senior member of staff will pick up that phone immediately a complaint comes in. Because it's around actually just acknowledging that somebody's not happy. Whether we're not determining at that point whether their complaint is justified or not, that's not really the point. The point is to be able to say to them, we're taking you seriously, and that's our standard. Of course, in a very busy day, sometimes that standard might slip by a day or a couple of days, and then getting through that process of really understanding what's happening in that child's life sometimes can have meaningful delay. But any delay that's simply about not getting it done quick enough is something that we track really carefully. And if I could just say that also in terms of our sense of recognition and the importance of recognition, one of the places where we get a huge amount of positive feedback around compliments is in our Stars of the Week. And one of the reasons that's so successful is that it's individual practitioners acknowledging other individual practitioners for their work. And very often I see in the Stars of the Week, which come to me in a very regular flow, I see feedback from judges, I see feedback from head teachers, I see feedback from other partners as well as other professionals within the organisation, and not just around children's services colleagues, but around colleagues across the whole of the council. And it's an absolute delight to be able to share those on a weekly basis and acknowledge that. I'm not sure we capture all those in the complaint in the compliments, actually. Tony, I might need to do better around that on the Stars of the Week, because sometimes I think it's another activity that we're just sort of putting out there, but not actually capturing it as compliments, but they all are absolutely compliments, not necessarily from members of the public, but from other people who can see and recognise the good work that's going on across the council.
That was really interesting. And I think you're probably right. I think there's an awful lot of the compliments that we don't capture. Okay. I think there's no more comments on this paper. I think it's a paper for noting, but I think we've done a good job on scrutinising it this morning. So I think with that, if I can thank you and the teams for the work that you've done on this, and we can move on to the next paper, which is item 9, risk management. Now, we don't have a paper for this. We had a briefing last week, and I'd like to hand over to Nick Eyre and David Trotter to present for this. If you could introduce yourself when you're talking, that would be really useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm Mark Eyre, I'm the Service Manager for Assurance. As you say, I'm joined today by David Trotter. He's our Risk and Resilience Officer, and risk management at the moment sits within my Assurance team. So this is the second of the risk management update reports that's been presented to the Scrutiny Committee. And what we would hope to do is to present that moving forward on a quarterly basis too. The aim of it is to both provide the committee with an assurance that the key risks have been identified and are being managed appropriately, but it's also to help inform the committee's future work plan of areas you may wish to delve into further. So as you mentioned, Chair, there's no paper supporting this, but we are now operating a risk dashboard, and that's accessible to members of the committee. I had the opportunity to demonstrate it to many of the committee members last week, and there were a number of areas that were identified that the committee today wanted to seek comment from officers that were in attendance. So I'm now going to test my technology skills and try and bring the dashboard up onto this screen, so bear with me. And what I'll do is I'll go to the relevant area of the dashboard, I'll read out the risk title, and if that's okay, Chair, I'll pass back to you to open up for discussion on those particular areas. So let's just allow this to load. So first of all, if I go to the adults and housing one that you picked out at the briefing the other day, it's one within the housing area, and it was the, oops, give me a second. It was the risk of poor housing conditions in the private rented sector. So if I stop there, Chair, and return back to yourself.
Thank you. Would any members like to comment on that? I'm quite happy to come in on this. I think that this is one that has certainly been ongoing. I'm a Weymouth councillor, and certainly within Weymouth there's a lot of private rented, particularly in the centre of town, and I think probably Councillor Orell will want to comment at some time. We've had a lot of initiatives over the years trying to improve the private rented sector across Weymouth and also other parts of Dorset. And I just wonder if we can have an update on how these initiatives are working. When we went into this unitary authority, the predecessor council were looking at selective licensing schemes, which is a bit like a sledgehammer. And we were looking at other schemes prior to putting a sledgehammer in. And I wonder if I could just have an update on that, please.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Chair. My name is Andrew Billiny. I'm Corporate Director for Housing and Community Safety. If you'd like, I think this is a pretty large topic that could feature as a topic for this agenda in more detail, because I'd say one of the reasons why we've have this down as a worsening risk is broader than the point you've made, Jill, around Councillor Taylor, around the very sad and tragic circumstances around the young child who died in Rochdale due to damp and mouldy housing conditions. So there are drives from government as well as internally about us looking at how far our powers extend to making sure that those situations don't arise. So damp and mouldy conditions, impact on ill health. That's a particular area of work we're looking to shift our own approach, certainly from that liaison with governments. They're expecting a response from in the end of January. So certainly can come back there. Because our position, we feel we do well in terms of acting where there is such a situation where a private tenant is living in damp and mouldy conditions, and we liaise with our housing associations and occasionally enforce against them as well. So we do have powers, enforcement powers that we use, but it seems as if the direction of travel for government, and I think it would be helpful, in my opinion, is to strengthen those for authorities. So if there is poor housing management, for example, that there is a role for a local authority. As everybody will know, we haven't got council housing here, so most of our activities is basically to work and persuade those landlords, social landlords as well as private landlords, to carry out their obligations around tenancies. So that poor housing condition piece is the cliche phrase carrot and stick. We do have enforcement powers, but we also work very hard to work alongside our landlords to make sure that the best practice is the dominant way of working rather than minor. I've started off by not answering your question, I'm sorry, but that's certainly an offer to come back if you want. Certainly, specifically though, very briefly, the work we do around Weymouth in particular, but also across the county, around using our existing powers to take action if there are poor housing conditions. That's the approach we've taken since rejecting, as you've described, the sledgehammer approach of having mandatory licensing across an area. We use the powers that are available to us to take action. Always happy to debate that in detail, because there are a number of ways of resolving it. But at the moment, we're taking the approach which is looking to respond wherever the problem arises, rather than having too much of a targeted approach for single wards and single areas. So long and general answer, Councillor Taylor, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
The thoughts that we could either bring it back to committee or some sort of form that Scrutiny could look at it. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on some of the things Andrew said, I spend probably more time emailing ASTA and other housing associations in my ward than I do probably most council departments. I don't have many private landlords, but I have dealt with those same situations. And the issue is, coming on to Andrew's point that we don't have council housing in Dorset, that is fundamentally something that we must realise is the real issue. And in 50 years' time, we're going to be still stuck in the same situation we are now, where we're just trying to encourage. 55% of local authorities in this country still directly own their own housing stock. Obviously, we can't buy back what we sold, but there is arguments. In the same way we're trying to deal with getting people out of bread and breakfast, we realise that it's more expensive in the long run, paying people to be in bed and breakfast, than it is to house them ourselves in our own properties, than it is if we look as a long-term strategy of getting back some of our own housing stock that we can control and is accountable to us. It might be an old-fashioned opinion, it might be an unpopular one, but I still fundamentally believe that to be the case.
For once, Councillor O'Leary, I would agree with you. I think we really do need to.
I saw a lot of nods.
Yes, I think you've got a lot of support within members right across the board on that one. I don't know whether. Sorry. Oh, right. Okay. I do apologise, Graham. Sorry, Councillor Carr-Jones. Can I go over to you, please? You're on mute.
Hi, so thank you, Councillor Taylor. Jill, I intend to be joining you later I think my cold has gone sufficiently that I won't be coming in to infect everybody. Just like to thank Councillor O'Leary for his comments around councils building housing, and remind him that even though we are a registered provider at Dorset Council in our own right, and we have a certain number of properties that we already own and currently manage, we have to be mindful of the financial constraints of becoming a stockholding authority in that, because it will mean for Dorset Council another level of management, another level of operational things that we're not currently doing. And the RPs are best placed. They delivered 529 houses last year. Yes, we can always do more. They're ambitious to do more. I think currently my view would be that Dorset Council is not best placed to be building its own council houses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I will come back very quickly to Councillor O'Leary, but could we please restrict this at the moment just onto the private rented sector? I think we're straying into something that could be a huge debate.
For another day.
for another day, and I'm quite happy to have that as a debate somewhere, but possibly not in this committee. But if it's just a quick one to come back, I've also got Andrew Billany, and I've got Councillor Orell chomping at the bit to come in. So if you could go really quickly, Councillor O'Leary, and then I'll go to Councillor.
Yeah, the situation with is to do with the private rented sector is the fact that RPs and private landlords are the only boys on the block. In effect, they're the only people in the game. We're not in that game. The stock that we do own, correct me if I'm wrong, is largely, if not exclusively, for people regarded as homeless or in other circumstances. I don't think a young family from Weymouth, for instance, would qualify, who are trying to get out of a normal rented house, would qualify to get in any of those properties. We spend an awful lot of money in this country subsidising the private rental sector. Housing benefit is proven to be far more expensive in the long run than social housing. And I don't believe in central government building houses. I do believe in local government in the long run, trying to return back to building houses. That requires us to be given the power and the responsibility and obviously the funding. But I come at it from a conservative standpoint. Other people might come at it from a socialist standpoint, but still it works.
Thank you. Hang on, I've got... Let me go to Councillor Orell first, because he did ask to speak quite a while ago. And I know I've also got Councillor Penfold, Councillor Batstone.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor O'Leary's comments from a Green perspective. Yes. So I'd like to take up Andrew Billany's kind offer of update when he has to do statutory reporting to central government. I know we steered away from registration of all the landlords, but it remains a problem. I've got in my ward, the poorest ward in Dorset, I've got 1,050 houses of multiple occupancy, and only about 37 of them are registered. It's the ones that are 3 stories high, which leaves lots of 2-story houses, some of which are well run. In fact, probably the majority are well run, but there's quite a substantial minority that aren't. And if there's one single thing I could, as a doctor in there for 30 years, I could have prescribed, it wouldn't have been antibiotics or complex surgery. It would have been a warm, dry house, because this black mold is a real problem. And for years, I've written 1 or 2 letters a week pointing out this black mold. It's a real problem, and people die because of it. They get heart disease, they get respiratory diseases. So although we've steered away from compulsory registration of all these sites, we need somehow a mechanism for encouraging landlords to keep their properties warm and dry. The ultimate solution would be Councillor O'Leary's, us to provide decent, warm, dry housing, preferably well insulated with its own microgeneration. That would be the Green perspective. But we do need some way of regulating private landlords. And I don't think just relying on complaints is sufficient, because I know from experience what happens with the worst landlords, if they complain, they're evicted. And they're turned out on the street over the weekend, probably illegally. But that's the truth of it. I've seen several families where that happens. So we do need some way of intervening in the private rented sector, because the power is too much in the landlords and they don't always provide houses that are fit for human habitation. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I think we've had a lot of discussions over this over the past few years. Really quickly, can I go on to Councillor Penfold?
Very quickly, Chairman. It's following on from Councillor Orell, actually. I just wondered how the process of inspection actually works. Can we just go in without informing the landlord or...
Thank you. I think I'm right in saying we can't go in without informing the landlord? No. Yeah, we don't have right of entry. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Batstone, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me speak. I put my hand up when Louis was straying off to the sunlit uplands of council housing, and I'm probably the only one in this room who remembers, indeed was involved with, the selling off, and you, dear, as well, selling off the council houses to housing associations. And what was behind that, I would just remind you, were the financial restrictions placed on us in terms of what we could do and develop by way of housing and how we could raise funds to build more houses. So that was the background to this. So those sunlit uplands, when we do one day perhaps explore them in more detail, there are issues that need to be borne in mind about funding.
Interestingly, Councillor Batstone, I would totally agree with you, because I think at the moment, whatever we do, we could end up contracting out to the RPs for a lot of the work had we got our own housing. So I think that's a whole new discussion that we do need at some time or other. But can I thank you? I've forgotten your name. Mr. Villany, for the offer of giving us some more information at some time to be timetabled.
Happy to. I recognise it's a complex subject. Can I just make one very brief point, though? Because I think we're dealing with a mixed economy of provisions. So I think what we haven't done justice today is just to explain the variety of approaches that we take. Certainly, I mean, there's the Pete Malcolm Regis scheme, 380 homes, new boilers. So there are things we can do where we help landlords as well as enforce. It's a balance. So I think if you're happy, if you'd like this, we could provide some written detail of what happens and what the remaining challenges are.
Thank you. Yes, please. And we'll have a discussion as to the format that we're going to bring that to the committee in. If I can go back to Mark.
Thanks, Chair. So the second risk that the committee wanted to focus in on was within the children's services area, and it's the risk failure to stabilise the budget for the high needs block.
Thank you. Would any members like to ask questions, or shall we go straight to officers for the implications of this? Because it's come up on a risk register and we are quite concerned about this. So if I can go over to, thank you, to Teresa, that would be brilliant.
Thank you, Chair. This will be covered later in our budget presentation, but fundamentally, I think for clarity for colleagues, well understood that the requirements for SEND that were new a number of years ago and with no additional funding have put significant pressures on a number of local authorities around deficit to the high needs block part of the school's funding. So all of the funding that covers SEND, children with education, health and care plans, for example. We entered into a conversation with DFE around a safety valve project, which has been well published and clearly has increased the level of investment from DFE to the local authority to help manage that deficit. That continues to be a challenge. It's a challenging position. We're looking, as we've again said publicly previously, to build either physically or in terms of other developments, 500 further places in our special schools offer and our support to other mainstream schools to support children staying in in their mainstream schools wherever possible. And that's the sort of quantum of the places that we identified following a lack of investment from Dorset County Council over many years that we were short of. That number of places clearly takes time to both get online in terms of mainstream schooling, but particularly in terms of buildings. And we continue to make good progress with that and continue to challenge the Department of Education around their free school programme, particularly in relation to Osprey Quay, which is part of that number of placements that we're looking to bring online. We continue to be in conversations with the DfE around that. The statutory instrument which would see this deficit come back to the council budgets has been moved forward a further 3 years. Again, that's published and in the public domain. And we're continuing to have conversations with the DfE about potentially extending some of the timeline of our plans following some real challenges in the construction industry and getting places built in a timely manner, and some challenges equally as again well understood around inflation and costs. So everything that we've been talking around at Heine's block is published. We've been very transparent around that in terms of the safety valve. It's a really important, clearly massively important project for us. Our strategy around that in terms of managing to limit the numbers of education, health and care plans where that's the right thing to do, and we only do that by being much more inclusive within our schools, is presently working. We are pegging at the space in which we'd said we would be around the numbers of education, health and care plans, but the costs in the system are higher, as they are with anything at this time, and the numbers of children with additional needs, as has been stated already today, has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so it's even more important that we work really closely across all of our teams and with our schools to keep children within their mainstream schools wherever that's possible for their needs to be met.
Thank you. Are there any further questions around that? I'm actually quite heartened by that response. Okay, can we move on, please?
Thank you, Chair. So there's there are a number of risks that are linked to the ability to recruit and retain staff, and at the pre-meet, committee members present wanted to discuss that in a bit more detail, in particular the issue around perhaps affordable housing. So I will, just as an example, bring up the adults risk, but it was one that cut across both adults and children's areas from a discussion perspective.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Orrell.
The point of putting this one in here, it's getting this as a cross-cutting theme. We've already mentioned housing. Housing comes up again and again because we cannot provide decent support for our older people in care homes and in that until we can get staff and audiologists, pharmacists, care workers, even junior doctors are not working in Dorset because they cannot afford the housing. So until we sort the housing out, we can't sort out all our other problems.
Thank you. I would totally agree with that. I think we've got a real problem in Dorset. It's interesting. I've had my eyes opened in the last year because of personal circumstances, and how on earth we've got any care workers at all, I don't know, but so much of it is linked to housing. And so the question basically is, what can we do around housing? We also heard during the report that we had on dentistry that the biggest problem with dentistry was housing and attracting people down here because people just can't afford to live here. And it's what can we do as a council to help, I don't want to say key worker housing because I think that is quite a difficult concept to work within, but how can we help people with housing as a council? Andrew?
I know we push for time, just to briefly, I'm looking forward to coming back to this group, and I think Graham will mention it later, about our developing work on the housing strategy, because our proposed approach is to be far broader than our statutory minimum approach to housing. So we reckon housing need comes in many forms, and certainly the need for care workers, health workers, key workers across the piece is something we're considering through that strategy, but also doing something about it in current where we can. So there are two brief things. We're certainly having senior level conversations across the health and care and housing sectors to see what we can do around accessing to private rented sector, and there's also a new block of flats being developed by the NHS by their contractor in Brewery Square, for example, coming over in a couple of months actually, and we're supporting them through our affordable housing colleagues. So there are things we're doing, but it is fair to say it's a massive challenge, and all the things you've said is correct. But we're trying to make sure we're wrapping around our housing strategies to make sure we're covering all those areas of need, and specifically the inability to employ people if they've got nowhere to live is well understood.
Thank you. Can I go to Councillor Carr-Jones, please?
Yeah, just very, very brief. Don't want to prolong it. Just to say, Jill, that your invitation and those on the members' housing advisory panel has gone out this morning. I'm hoping to see you all on the 2nd of February.
Thank you. I look forward to that. I can see one or two members frantically going through their emails at the moment. I think with that, can we move on to the next one? Sorry, Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just want to say, by no means at all this morning was I had anything against the housing department of this council. It's one of the hidden gems of this council. It does a fantastic job, and it's on the right track. And I actually think, like I say, we don't talk about the good work we do on housing, given the constraints that are put upon them. And I think they do a fantastic job. And I mean, I do rely on the housing department an awful lot as a councillor.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there. Councillor Rennie?
I did see this morning there's a planning application in Lyme Regis for a care home there that's wanting to build some accommodation at the back. But they are talking about accommodation for single people, like student type accommodation, which is shared accommodation, which will be really good somewhere in Lyme Regis because they're finding it hard to recruit. But I think we've got to be sure that this is not what we're talking about. It is proper family homes so the family can stay and continue to grow their profession within Dorset.
Thank you.
Bill.
Councillor Pipe. I was.
Yeah. Following on what Councillor Rennie's just said about building accommodation. On my patch, there's an application been ongoing now for 3, perhaps 4 years, where a chap he's got permission to build 4 or 5 self-contained bungalows on a plot of land for elderly people. That's what he wants to do with his little bit of land. He wants to do that, and he wants to do it for the community. But it's all being held up by planning policy, which is all about nitrates for Poole Harbour. And I think it really has gone far enough with this sort of silly game. This man's pulling his hair out. And we would have 4 or 5 bungalows for elderly people who need them. Not getting it.
I think if we can, within the housing strategy, possibly pick up some of these aspects on planning and work out how we can how we can change planning, how we can adapt planning to work better for our communities. And I'm probably going to be slammed. At least I haven't got any planners in the room. Thank you. We'll move on. If I can go on to the next point, please.
Thanks, Chair. The next risk is a public health one, and it was the delivery of OHID targets for drug and alcohol misuse.
Thank you. This was very much around funding and money and how we're dealing with children with mental health issues. So I think that covers our children's department. I think I've got a question from Councillor Orell.
Yeah, I flagged it up to make sure it appeared on our risk register because over the last 5 years or so, we, as a council, but also it's the whole of the country, has cut its funding for people recovering from drug and alcohol. And what we've then seen is a rise in death rate year on year, nationally and within Dorset. So I want to, the dashboard as it stands didn't have much on public health, so I wanted to make sure we recognised it.
Can I just in second, please, because I think you've gone on to the next one, public health, drugs and alcohol. At the moment, we're talking about mental health for children. And
But actually within the budget papers, on page 76, at the very bottom of it, it does actually mention it there as well within our budget, because it talks about nationally an increase in numbers of children being taken into care while waiting long periods for children and adolescent mental health service, CAMS, often at a significant cost. So it is within what we're going to probably be talking about, maybe come up later within the budget papers.
Harry. I think your microphone's on.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Yes, this is an area that has been very close to our hearts in Children's Services, as you can imagine. And we particularly, of course, have been reflecting on children and young people's mental health and well-being as we've come out of things such as lockdowns, which were scenarios that none of us ever envisaged would happen to our children and young people when we first became counsellors. We do receive a lot of comments about the access and availability of services from CAMS, and that is an area that, as a service body, we are very conscious of because, of course, as a council responsibility, we are responsible under social care. When it comes to meeting those health needs, that sits with our partner organisations, and we really do need to see some progress from them in supporting our children and young people. And I know those reviews are ongoing, and we hope that we will be seeing a far more positive on a front foot stance from them going forward. One of the battlegrounds I think we have seen, and we've all heard from our own residents, is that escalation of what could be a worry or an anxiety to becoming a serious health concern. And it's how we go about de-escalation of those anxieties back to a normal, what we could class as a normal daily worry in our life. It's perfectly normal to be concerned about something. It is not normal to be preoccupied by it to such an extent. It has such a negative impact on your life. But we have to accept as a council that a large chunk of that responsibility sits outside of this organisation. But that does not mean for 1 minute we are going to shirk on our responsibilities. Quite the opposite, I can assure you.
Thank you. I think it's a case of just noting that part. And could I just come back now on Councillor Orell and what we were talking about the drugs and alcohol, and the basically cutting one service has caused a real problem within others. Can I just come back on you, Councillor Orell? Is there anything you'd like to add at the moment?
No, it's just that we noted when we looked at the dashboard that the public health indicators were quite light, and we'd like to see them put a bit of emphasis and concentrate their efforts on this one, because it should be flashing red.
Thanks, Joe. I'm not sure whether there's any officers to actually comment, but in terms of the public health risks, they're fairly new on the risk register, so they're still in many ways developing. But I'll take that back to the public health team as a comment, if that's okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you. Any discussion around drug misuse that we have, I would welcome someone from either the Police and Crime Commissioner's office or the police itself to be included on that, because see what their perspective gives as well, because it's first and foremost a criminal issue.
Can I just go to Councillor Rennie?
We're very lucky because we've got Greg Carr-Jones, who is chairman of Community Safety Panel as well, that has all of those contacts. And when they meet regularly, they get updates on the situation throughout the whole of the area. So we could actually invite Graham as well to be able to be part of that. Sorry, another job, Graham.
Okay. Councillor O'Leary.
Always a pleasure, never a chore.
Thanks, Jessie. I just want to, if I may, just chip in on the last comment. It's drugs and alcohol sits between police and health, and it's the emphasis you put on them is the outcomes, what we've had over the last few years, there's been more emphasis on police and less of an emphasis on health. And the end result has been an increase in deaths. So we do need to concentrate on this one and see it as not just police, it's health. Thanks.
So that's why I mentioned the panel, because the panel is a partnership.
I'm a little bit confused at the moment because I don't quite know how to involve scrutiny or whether there's a need to involve scrutiny in that one. I'll come to you in a minute. Can we take that away to consider, please? Because I need to go away and think about that. Councillor Pipe.
Only to say, Madam Chairman, that Councillor Carr-Jones was trying to intervene earlier, just as I think he was only making a Councillor Oral O'Leary started.
Chairman, it may be that it can come back to you through the CSP plan that's coming towards headed towards full council later in this year. So it may be that we can bring something in through that into scrutiny and get the report in that away to you.
Okay, that would be really useful. Thank you very much, Councillor Carr-Jones. If we make a note of that, that would be good. Okay, I think, have we finished with the risk register now? We have, unless any member has checked the risk register and would like to bring anything else up. Okay, we're all sitting very quietly. If we can move on from there, if I can thank you, Mark and David, for your input, that was really useful. If I can move on to, we're just going to do very quickly the committee and cabinet forward plans, and then we'll move on to the budget, which is the main thrust of today's meeting. So if I can just go through this on a page-by-page basis. So I haven't got page numbers on mine, which isn't helpful, but if we can go through the cabinet forward plan first of all. So the first page, which is mainly stuff for January and February. Would anybody like to comment on the first page? The second page? The third page? The fourth page? The fifth page? The sixth page? Seventh page, and the 8th page. Okay. If there is anything that you would be interested in looking at from a scrutiny point of view that we've missed on that, because we have gone through that very quickly, please drop us an email, get in touch, and talk to officers about it, talk to me about it, and that would be really useful. And that will also help develop our own forward plan. Yeah.
That report from Andrew.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, the reports that we've asked for this morning, we will look at how we're going to take those through scrutiny, because there are a number of ways that we're exploring that we can do that, either through informal working or coming back to committee. So I think there's a number of them that will be coming back like that. Right, if I can move on now to the budget and the medium-term financial plan strategy. How I'm going to take this, for members out there, I'm going to stay very, very focused on what belongs to this committee, i.e. the children and the health and adult services. What I don't want to do is to stray off to the other parts of this report. There's an awful lot on resources, corporate, place. That will be down to Councillor Bartlett's committee on Thursday. I think if we stray too much, we're going to be here at 8 o'clock tonight, and I really, really don't want to do that. I have sort of swapped around the papers a little bit, and I'm going to start with children's services. The reason I'm doing that is twofold. I think adults is the largest budget of the two of them, so I'm going to do that one after lunch. But also, we always seem to come in and hammer housing from the outset. So I thought I'll try and turn all this round a bit so that we don't start with housing. We'll put housing down the list just to give you a bit of break and so that you know we do love you really and we don't want to pick on you. I really don't want a complaint coming in from about the chair. So what we will do, if we do children's services first, and then I'm going to call a short break, a comfort break, possibly up to half an hour. It depends on how we're going on timing, just so we can all have a stretch, go and get some lunch, catch up on emails and all that sort of thing. So if I can hand over to children's, I understand that we've got a briefing now. Could I please ask you to keep the briefing relatively shortish? I know you've got an awful lot of information you would like to get out, and it's really welcome, the information that you do put out. But please, if we can keep it relatively short so that we can then debate the budget proposals. If I could hand over to Theresa Levy and Councillor Parry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So we do have a few slides to share, and I would keep that briefing tight. It is quite straightforward for us to do that. We've been part of an ongoing plan. I don't know if I'm showing the slides or somebody else's. Mine's not seeming to move on. Hang on. Let's try again. Are you sharing, George? I'll try again, yep. Great, thank you. Nationally, as we've already discussed here this morning, there's a really challenging backdrop to children's lives and children and families' well-being. And we see that here in Dorset, absolutely we do. We see same children, same families under pressures of all sorts of experiences and some challenges within that. And along with those additional challenges, we're also presently anticipating some very significant policy change within children's social care. So the review of Josh McAllister, which was mostly published last year, but will actually be responded to by the government in the next few weeks, and the Send Green paper, will see significant changes to almost all of the children's services delivery. And we'll bring more of that forward to this panel in coming weeks and months. There remains some uncertainty within that, but it certainly is one of the biggest wide-scale policy and probably primary legislation changes that we will have seen in over 30 years. Why we can feel somewhat reassured as a council within that is that much of the underlying messages within those reviews talk about rebalancing the system, moving much more into an early help space and model than a highly interventionist model. And we'll come on to talk about that very briefly because we're in a pretty good place to be able to, well, in fact, we've already responded in some ways, driven some of those messages. And that isn't just because it seems like the right thing to do, but actually nationally, as you can see from that slide, there's been a huge pressure financially around the numbers of children that we're having to intervene with within the country, seeing really significant pressures on children's services budgets nationally. 9% being the average, you can work it out for yourself. That clearly means that many local authorities have had much higher pressures than 9%. But I'm really proud of the way in which our staff and partners have worked to make sure that we've made really good use of those public funds through the Dorset Children Thrive locality model. And that in itself, along with a range of other developments, has seen our position actually being much lower than that 9% pressure. Yeah, it's hard every day, of course it is, but the reality is we've been driving through better outcomes for children, and we know that better outcomes produce lower spend. So we are very much in that space of, sorry, I've got it on your screen, but I've lost it on mine, thank you. We're very much in that space of having been able to invest in our foster carers, but it does take time to be able to deliver that, and that's an incredibly important part of what our model will be looking to achieve. So I won't talk through this slide, but it'll be available for colleagues after this process. What this very much shows in a data space is that improvement that you can see where we are bucking the trend within Dorset Council area. We have seen an increase in some processes over the last 3 years. That's to be welcomed. The increase in Section 47s is the process we undertake where a young person or a child is at risk of child protection needs. Really helpful to see that increase, and we know what that increase is about. It's about a much more rigorous approach to child exploitation and being really coordinated with our police and health colleagues around how we do that. We've also seen some need in terms of increase in referrals, but again, not the kind of spikes that others have seen. And what we can absolutely evidence, and the really key element of that slide is the one on the left, which shows the incredible increase in early help assessments. 100% increase. What this council committed to do in the last 3 years with Blueprint was to make sure that we had more help earlier for our families. And this slide shows very clearly that we've been able to achieve that. And we can show that that's having impact. We know from a family feedback position, and we know from our data that that's having impact. We can also show that we've been able to continue to fund that by changing the way in which we spend our budget, less in children in care. Children who need to come into care continue to come into care. The courts, by the time that we bring those children, agree with us that they're the right children. And Ofsted, when they reviewed our work just about 12 months ago, told us that the right children were coming into care at the right time. So it's not that we don't bring children into care, but we bring them in a planned way, which we know costs less. So we, again, along with the DFE, are talking about this rebalancing the system. And we can again be really confident that we're seeing those decreases in numbers of children who have been worked with by social workers, increase in children who have been worked with by a range of other practitioners. And again, understanding now our families really well, we've launched the Safeguarding Families Together project, which is around presently only in Chesil and Dorchester and West, and that's not the extent of our ambition. Our ambition is for it to be across the whole of the county, but we must manage this carefully. It is about managing risk in the community, and it's about doing that by having our adult colleagues with mental health and domestic abuse and drugs and alcohol expertise working really closely with our children's services colleagues to wrap around those families where there are real complexities, to really check through those assessments. Can these families suitably care for their children to a standard that would be good enough for all of us and our children, and what support can we offer them to do that? And at the point in which that's not possible, then we would continue obviously into that process around sadly removing and looking for permanency for those children. So a very quick slide there, just to look at the numbers that we're talking about in our system. They are extensive. We have that very significant requirement to look at those children with SEN support and children supported by an education, health and care plan, something in the region of 10,000 children in our county. We have 500 plus children who are electively home educated. Again, as part of a policy change, we're expecting to see new requirements of us to really visit and support and assess those children, which we welcome. We're just waiting for that announcement, but we would welcome being able to get closer to those children to be able to provide support in terms of potential safeguarding, but also curriculum. We have, if you remove the numbers of unaccompanied minor children there, you'll see we're down to about 410 plus children in care. That's a drop of 80 to 90 over a 2-year period. But our unaccompanied minor children will continue to come and are welcome members of our community. They bring lots of great capacity and ability, but they also have some challenges in our budget. The numbers of care leaver continues to grow. We actually have about 512 care leavers at the present time, with 290 odd receiving a service. Some young people who leave our care don't choose to receive a service, but those that do are receiving it, and that number goes up every year. Child protection's managed, children in need and early help now at about the same levels, which was always our objective. So the proposed children's budget is, as you can see there, an uplift of about 4.5%. Our 5-year transformation programme will see that come through in terms of further savings, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. When that all washes through with some of the other investment and some of the other pressures, which are on future slides, it actually brings the children's services to a budget reduction of 2.2 million. That is going to be a tight delivery, but we are confident we can do it if our model continues to sustain, and that means that increasingly we have others working with us, and we are very supported by the DFE in some of that, as you'll see in terms of some of our fundings there too. Children's services pressures are detailed on that slide. They are very much around supporting our model. One of the things that external validation, both by Ofsted, by the DFE and by other partners, has absolutely proved is that our front door, which works on a conversation base. So many of you will be familiar with the fact that most local authorities have a referral. You write something down, you send it in, and somebody looks at it down the line. Or maybe a very talented but a business support person picks up the phone to your call of concern around safeguarding. We've taken the best evidence from around the country and believe that actually that's exactly where you should have your most experienced practitioners, fielding those contacts, speaking to those teachers, health visitors, family members at the earliest possible point.
Thank you. Could I just interrupt at the moment, because I think most of the questions are going to come around this table. Do you want to take questions now, or would you rather wait to the end of the presentation?
I think I'm sensing the end is what I'm hearing around me, so if I'll go through very quickly and then come back and put this table back up, if that's okay. Great, thank you. Okay, now I've got to... Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks, Paul. You're doing a sterling job there. So, very basic budget breakdown. You can see exactly where we spend most of our money is in care and protection, as you'd expect it to be. Some of that is, early help is spread across some of those places in terms of how we define that as well. But a major part of the care and protection budget spend is placements. 5-year transformation, as I've said, we've been promising savings for all of those years. In the past, we've delivered significantly. We're on track to deliver something in the region of 70% of this year's, even though there's been some real challenges in that. And we'll continue to look to deliver those savings into future years. These are already modelled into the medium-term financial strategy for the Council. We are successful at both bidding for transformation funds locally and nationally, and you can see from this slide some of the additional funding which we've been able to secure, almost £1 million around family hubs. Lots of more conversation around that in this committee at another time, I think. Funding for our Mockingbird, our investment in fostering, funding for the DFE Staying Close, that's to support young people in residential care to be able to have support in their year after 18. And funding for some other areas around that revenue and cashable savings. I think I'm going to pause there, because there's plenty more information which I'm happy to give colleagues. But the only other thing I wanted to just focus on very quickly was that risk factor that we talked about in terms of high needs block. I think I've said all of this already, really. The number of new HCPs does continue to grow, but it remains on track in that stabilisation space that we've talked about. We continue to drive, with all of our colleagues across the Council, the growth in number of places, both in schools that we already have and in building projects. We will see numbers of those opening up again this year and into next year, and continue to challenge the DFE in a very supportive way around how the SEND Green Paper's going to land and Osprey Key.
Thank you very much for that. That was a really useful presentation. Could we have a copy of the presentation, do you think, sent out to members? That would be really good, thank you. Right, so I'm going to go over for questions now. Councillor O'Leary?
Yes, thank you. On the National Transfer Scheme, it's got a cost on here of £366,000, and it says that the Home Office funding does not necessarily cover the full cost of supporting these young people, and therefore this remains a risk. Historically, what sort of percentage of the total cost of housing these individuals does the Home Office meet?
Thank you, Councillor Leary. So the language that's used by the Home Office is full cost recovery. Much of the cost recovery of the actual accommodation for these young people is achieved, as you'll appreciate, without in any way sharing inappropriate levels of communication around these individuals who have the same right of confidentiality to everybody else. Some young people come to us with their very real experience of trauma in their journey and in their previous lives, and they have more complex needs than the full cost recovery. There's a set amount that is given for accommodation, and some of the accommodation costs for some young people is more than that, and that accounts for some of this cost pressure. But the other cost pressure also comes from elements that are not in any way funded by the Home Office. The allocation of social workers, the allocation of independent reviewing officers, the allocation of translators and interpreters for these young people. And now that we are up at 45, 46 young people at any one time with a target from the National Dispersal Scheme of 67, those costs, as you can imagine, are significant. So it is important that we identify and highlight that actually there is a further need for investment in some of these areas that we wouldn't have required if these young people hadn't been coming to live with us here in Dorset.
Yeah, Councillor O'Leary wants to come back. Could I just ask a question on that? Could I just have assurances that this is proportional across the country, that we're not taking in more than would be recognised sensibly? Thank you.
There is a percentage of the population quota that is given to all local authorities.
Thank you. Can I come back to Councillor O'Leary then?
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to work out. So the £366,000 on this budget allocation for this, is that what we are paying for the things you just mentioned, or do those things that you just mentioned come from other budget lines that feed into this, or is this including the money that comes from the Home Office, or is that a separate amount of money?
The 366,000 is only the excess of what is already, if you like, casting off from the money that comes from the Home Office. So we have much more expenditure than 366,000. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie.
Could I just come back on Councillor O'Leary's previous question about the proportionality? And when the numbers are looked at, does the rurality of an area be taken into account as well? Because, of course, as we've discussed before, some of the young people coming, it's not appropriate for them to be in rural areas. They want to be living in conurbations around towns. So for some local authorities, that in itself is easier around travel and transport costs.
No, it's not taken into consideration, rurality or any other kind of issue around demography. And I would certainly say that our colleagues in Kent and Croydon and other places that have very, very large populations of unaccompanied minors don't consider it any easier, I have to say, than we do to find placements. And the big challenge we face is that about half of these young people are not presently within the Dorset Council area. We are having to place them outside of our boundaries because of the lack of placements available to them. As you'd appreciate, what we hear from those who are here and what we hear from the schools who take these young people in, again, that's clearly a further requirement, is that they are very often fantastic members of our community. But lots of placements and lots of carers don't know that when they're arriving. They are an unknown quantity in many ways. And so therefore being able to place them in families from the outset isn't always possible. So we're often looking at supported accommodation, and much of that supported accommodation, as we've already discussed today, sorry to come back to housing so quickly, but isn't easily available within our county. And so we are placing these children further away. That in itself adds cost, clearly both in terms of time and mileage and other factors. So it is a huge challenge for us. We're working heavily with the Home Office and the DfE and others to think about the range of ways in which we might be able to make good offers for these young people. But we're certainly, in fact, at the present time, we're beneath our 0.9%. 0.1? It was 0.07 previously, now 0.1, sorry, % of the population, which would be 67. We've got those children on a waiting list. It's not that we don't know who they're wanting to transfer from the hotels and from holding spaces in Kent. We do know, but we want to make sure that we can place those children and young people effectively when the time's right.
Can I ask on that one, have we got money within the budget to increase our supply of foster carers, etc.? How much work are we doing on that? Because our foster carers are really short in Dorset, and it quite saddens me when I see the population of Dorset that there just aren't people coming forward saying that they want to support these children and look after not only unaccompanied children but also our own children, because there would be huge cost savings to us. And I know a couple of foster carers and there's huge benefits for them. Councillor Parry.
And yes, thank you once again for the opportunity to make the appeal for those who would make the opportunity to make fantastic foster carers to come and have a conversation with us. We'd very much like them to have that happen. It is quite a complex place, foster care. I mean, we have our own foster carers inside Dorset Council. There are those, of course, who foster with other fostering agencies who happen to be resident in Dorset as well, and there are some hundreds of children placed with them. And then, of course, we have to look at other factors such as connected persons who sit inside our fostering arrangements with special guardianship orders and the like. So it is quite a complex picture. But yes, we would always welcome the conversation to recruit more foster carers. That gives us the opportunity to have the best placements. And if we can get the placement capacity right, then we've got every opportunity of ensuring things like we won't see increases in placement breakdown, which of course is very detrimental to any young person when they have to continually be moved on from place to place.
Thank you. Can I just have assurances that you're content with the budget that you have for this work?
Thank you, Chair. We have looked this year at a potential remodelling of some of our budgets in order to be able to think about the fees that we pay to our foster carers. As you'll appreciate, in fact, I think it is nearly 4 years since we've uplifted our foster carers' fees, and there's a paper coming to Cabinet next month to look at those fees to make sure that they are thoroughly competitive. What our foster carers have told us over numerous months of working with them around the Mockingbird project is that support is as important. But we know in this marketplace we must be financially competitive too at a time when for anybody undertaking any work is clearly high pressure. So we've already remodelled our budgets to be able to bring that paper forward next month.
Thank you. Can I just ask members, I've got a number who are wishing to speak. Is this all on the unaccompanied minors and foster carers? I've got Councillor Ridout, Councillor Pipe and Councillor O'Leary. Is this still on the same subject? Or? It's on slide here, and it's also about the increases.
I think we have to just go.
Okay, I'll go straight down the list from here then. So the next one I've got is Councillor Ridout, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just like to say, first of all, Children's Services, you do a fantastic job and you've set a budget against immense pressures. What I would like to know is, obviously you've made assumptions and there are risks out there. Will the current budget, can you mitigate those risks in the current budget? I'm talking about risks with carers, staff issues, more children needing care. We know there's unaccompanied minors has gone from 9 to 44 in the year, and there's 24 more immediately coming through. And also costs like, what's probably out of your control, is children in care, the long waiting time for children and adolescent mental health services. I mean, how can you address such things? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. How can we mitigate? So we are mitigating against the cost of unaccompanied minors in the ways that we can see these pressures that we've considered in our budget setting. We can mitigate against the numbers of children coming into care generally in terms of our best work. And the teams that are doing that work are very well supported by their frontline managers and are being very effective in that. We have been mitigating workforce challenges by investing, and you'll see on the bottom line, it's not a lot of money, but we've put it on there as a constant reminder that we never step away from growing our own. And we have been funding up to 25 social work trainees through a range of posts in the last few years. And we continue to see those come back to us year on and year out, which is great. But we need to continue to do that. We know that growing our own is the only option. We've been very creative with our recruitment and retention. We've been overseas. We've been creating new posts. We've been doing a range of other things. But actually growing our own and making sure that we have opportunities for career growth has been really important. That's part of that mitigation. I think the challenge we face around really deeper working needed with our partners now that they're all settling and in position is around making sure that, the gap in CAMS and the gap in significant mental health support for children clearly will fall back to us as a safeguarding matter. There's no two ways about it. If children aren't getting the support they need earlier around their mental health and then even later around their complex mental health, we will absolutely be stepping in around a safeguarding matter. And those costs, therefore, come to us. But more importantly to me, I think that parity of esteem is absolutely a civil right. And so I know my health colleagues agree with me. And together we will be working this year to think about how we create really meaningful multidisciplinary teams in the community to really work effectively with those young people with complex needs. Because that has been a huge challenge, as I've said previously in this chamber, in the last couple of years. So mitigating that absolutely through partnership work, making sure that we're in that right space. But there are absolutely those risks.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to add that when we set out this budget process, we felt it absolutely of paramount importance to be quite candid and open about the risks that we could see and the ways that we could go about mitigating those risks. We cannot deliver a risk-free environment. We actually are always operating in the position of managed risk. And one of those managed risks I think we have to look at in terms of staff recruitment and retention is the behaviours of neighbouring authorities or other authorities. And if they choose, for example, to alter their staffing policies, how will that impact upon our own staff? So if we really do want to stay ahead as the employer of choice, and that is our stated aim, then we're going to have to continually monitor how we support our staff. And as has been said, part of that will be down to financial reward, but clearly part of it is also how we treat them and the respect that we give them and the dignity and support in the work that they do. And thank you for your kind comments about the service as a whole.
So interestingly, this could be coming back to housing. Could I go to Aidan, please, and could you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Good morning. Aidan Dunn, Chief Finance Officer for the context of today's meeting. I just wanted to comment, give a broader comment on the aspect of financial risk. And as Teresa has just laid out very clearly, there's that a lot of the financial risk is held within individual directorates and has to be carefully managed, and the budget setting process is part of that. But beyond that, in terms of our second line of defence, as it were, the budget proposals that you've got in front of you have a contingency. So this is funding that is currently unallocated, and that's 8.2 million, and that's held to try and manage risks across the entire organisation. And that's the management and the deployment of that is overseen by the senior leadership team. And then beyond that, we have our reserves and sort of ultimately our safety net there. So we are reliant on really strong financial management, but as we've seen in particular during the course of the last year, there are uncertainties, there are surprises, these risks do come to fruition. So part of our financial strategy is having that risk mitigation by contingency and then reserves as well.
Thank you very much for that. And that is really useful, because trying to set a budget now for what we're going to spend the end of the year with all the risks that are within it is almost an impossible task, unless you happen to be a fortune teller or something like that. And these budget settings are always so difficult to get them anything like accurate. Councillor Pipe?
Thank you, Chairman. Having read this thing a number of times over the last few days, every time you read it, you pick something else new out, and you either like it or you don't. But what I found overall is that this is a very well-balanced budget. I would like to thank the portfolio holders, the leader, the officers in particular for bringing... Okay, sorry. Did you get the first bit? Right, okay, so I would like to say thank you to the portfolio holders, the officers in particular, who've done an excellent job on putting together this budget, and the leader of the council. And what I get from it, I see there are no proposed cuts in service, which I think is absolutely amazing in the financial straits that we find ourselves at the moment, both locally and nationally. If I could refer to this Children's Services pressures thing up there, just one which I think may be a typo, but I'm sure I will be put right, where it says on the top one, this also includes fees and charges and gas and electricity changes. Is that changes or charges? Just a quickie.
Can somebody answer that for me? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's changes to charges. Sorry to be tricky with that, but I think that's the intention.
Damn. I thought we were going to get a nice cheap electricity bill there. Anyway, on the table of the increases, we have, of course, the 5.586 increases in that one. But in, I think it's 20.31, we note that we have an extra £3.7 million available. Now, if you add all those up, that comes to 2.474 million, which leaves 1.326 million left. If those figures belong to that equation, and I may be wrong, what's happening to the other 1.326 of extra income that we're actually getting from the 3.7 million?
Oh, Aidan looks like he's got an answer. Well, Lee may have. Jill, you've got your mouth.
Thank you. Yes, there are a lot of moving parts in this. The reference to paragraph 20.31, when you say there's a social care grant of 3.7 million that has been made available to the Directorate, that was a last-minute announcement that we were notified on the 19th of December. So overall, there was a social care grant of around about 9 million, and we've shared it between adults and children. So that grant is in addition to the funding you've got there, and is currently awaiting further guidance from government of what it's specifically for. And I think Teresa alluded to some of the issues coming down the road in the earlier introduction. And Lee, can I just check, is that broadly what you were going to say as well? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry to take up more time, but it's even better news than I thought with an extra 3.7 million. Well done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I've got a question. Councillor Rennie, Councillor O'Leary. Go on, we'll go Councillor O'Leary next.
Yeah, no, it was just coming on to what Councillor Pipe was saying. I was reading in the newspaper that Brighton and Hove Council is looking at putting up their council tax for the full 5%, as well as cutting funding for children's services in terms of nurseries. I'm just, like I say, all I'd like to ask really is another confirmation that we're planning on cutting no funding to any services in the Children's Directorate.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary, for your question. We set about a budget which was to deliver transformation of service, not about cutting the frontline delivery, and we have absolutely kept our pledge on that. If anything, we've expanded our provision to children and young people across Dorset, but we've done so through the transformation in the way we work. I'm absolutely happy to go into any detail of any of the pace of change work that we're doing and the transformation work that's underway, but I would want to give an absolute assurance to this committee that we have drafted a budget here that meets the needs of children's services with the best of the information that we have available, and we have absolutely no intention of cutting our service delivery.
That is excellent news. Thank you very much. If I can go on to Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I think I'd like to just say a huge thank you, because we can see a huge difference, and the working together and the partnership working, I think, has been absolutely crucial. The partnership working has saved money, but it's cost money and resources to bring all of that into place. And I'd like to, the Safeguarding Families Together, I think, has to be transformational, to use your word as well. And when this comes through the whole of Dorset, the difference will be incredible. But that in itself brings its challenges around recruitment and partners recruiting. And it's a bit coming back to Louis' point around, or somebody said, it's about what's happening in your neighbours. And because perhaps just talking around domestic abuse services, there's only a certain pot of people who work within that field. And I'm always, and I think you know this, what I'm going to say, I'm always concerned within these small fields. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul at times. And so we need to be very mindful as we gradually grow the different pilots and then we move into projects, that we are aware of that. But we also are mindful that we are wanting to protect our own. We want to be the best, so we have to do these things. But again, recruiting from out of county, I'm sorry, it's the H word again, housing. All of these people have to have somewhere to live as well. I was interested when, Teresa, you mentioned we've been recruiting from abroad, and you haven't mentioned ever a problem about recruitment and the housing of people who come from abroad. So I wondered, that was part of my question. And the main part, because that's around praise, the main part is around leaving care services. Again, it's the housing. And what's going to happen as we have young people reaching the age of 25, needing somewhere for them to go. You're talking about growing the Keeping in Touch service, and we would always want to support people, because just because you magically become 25 doesn't mean you're able to do everything. And how are we going to be able to do with this? The growing number, and I know Aidan is been marvellous where he's talked about reserves, but this sort of service continues and continues with people, especially as we know about the mental health issues. It's about, my concern is about inappropriate housing for people maybe when they become to the older group. Sorry, a bit more than one.
Okay, I'll just, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rennie. So a couple of things really, and there's more conversation potential around this in terms of Safeguarding Families Together in particular. Our real ambition is that we simply see everybody within the whole partnership of Dorset much more well informed around domestic abuse, drugs and alcohol, and the impact upon children. It isn't about just defining a very small specialist group of workers. That's where we begin, but the absolutely making that everybody's business is part of that whole structure. That does then genuinely mean that we grow a workforce beyond our walls that actually understand what that looks like. So many people in this chamber will know the impact of low-level parental animosity on children, but many may not. We're not talking about domestic abuse and parental alienation needing to be very severe for that to have impact upon children. Constancy is as big a problem as severity. So we want to do more around that in terms of public health messaging. We want to be much clearer around, families arguing on the front doorstep around contact is not acceptable and it is hurting their children. And we want to be really challenging around that. And some of that work will be going on in the family hub space. So we're really confident about making sure that that links together. So none of these transformation programs stand alone as islands, or they wouldn't work. But that wider workforce piece is something that we're doing there. But it's also a truism that if you make job roles more interesting and multidisciplinary job roles are more interesting to staff, they will come. And so we also know that that's absolutely part of that process. We'll come back another time around overseas recruitment and the messages that those young people and those lovely staff have given us, because we've got a lot of learning in there. I'm delighted that all 10 remain within the council. That's extraordinary in 2.5 years. Most people have a bit bigger turnover than that. We're really pleased to see that continuing. But there have been some challenges along that journey, and they've been very generously sharing those with us, so we can think about that to the future. Leaving care services, if we have young people who keep their connections with their family, have employment, education and training, and have opportunities to be really socially engaged with friends, having good housing will be the final part of that. Really pleased to be working so closely with our colleagues in housing and beyond, to have Kirtleton Avenue really just about to open. I know Councillor Parry will want to say more about that. Really exciting first step for us, but not the end of that. But really our great achievements will be around having education and training and employment for those care leavers, really good relationships so that they are fantastic members of our community.
Thank you. I'm going to come in and ask my question next. Then I've got a question from Councillor Pipe, and then I'm going over to the non-committee members, because I know I've got at least one question from there. Can I just ask a few questions around the fourth bullet point down, the children who are disabled, the intensive support packages? There's an additional allocation of nearly 700,000 for that, and we're looking at supporting these people, these children. Where I'm coming from is to support people, we need carers. And we are so strapped for carers. And I'm wondering on the balance of this, could we be in a position that we either don't spend this money or we overspend it because of our lack of carers to go and give respite care for our foster carers, etc., and our people who aren't foster carers, sorry, about our parents within these situations?
Hi, I'll just respond a little bit to where some of the pressure's coming from. So absolutely our ambition is to help families stay together and support children to stay with their parents and carers. So that's the starting position and really important for us to do that. You're absolutely right. We've had a challenge in terms of the availability of carers at an affordable price. So that has been a challenge for us. And one of the other challenges has been around having sufficient overnight short breaks available for those families too. So the things that we're doing this year, brilliant, thank you. A slide up there is around how we're developing our own in-house accommodation, because we have gone to the market multiple times actually to try and buy this from the market, and it hasn't been there. So we're making it ourselves as part of our sort of make-buy decisions. So you'll see on there we have overnight short breaks coming through, and we're adopting our really successful harbour approach into how we support our children with disabilities. So there will be more of what we do ourselves as we develop our provision across the board. And alongside that, we're doing some work with our colleagues in adult services around the Dorset Care Framework, and there's a specific lot on there around supporting in-home care so that we can get a fairer price and have more growth within that arena as well. So a commissioning challenge and an in-house provision challenge about how we bring that together. So yes, absolutely a budget pressure in there, but one that we're seeking to mitigate in different ways across the next few years as well.
Thank you very much for that. And that is really good to hear. Can I just ask another question on page 98, which is the table around the summary of movements. Within the savings part of that, there are 5 amounts, 1, 2, 3. 4 of them are for £500,000 and 1 of them is for £1 million. I hate ballpark figures like that because it looks to me as if figures have just... Was that your question? It looks as if figures have just been plucked out of the air. Is there any evidence behind these figures being put in as savings, or is it just that we haven't developed the plans far enough to be able to put accurate figures within that?
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with you. It would be much nicer if it had a sort of 0.3 pence on the end. They are estimations, but they're evidence-based estimations around what we think is the potential for the quantum. So we have kept them as big figures, largely because actually when you're kind of continually going back to, let's go back to our kind of visual, it's really important. These are big changes that we're looking at around kind of our 5-year plan. And so we have taken those kind of quantum figures and we've rounded them. But you can see from previous years, we've been able to deliver to those sorts of rounded figures.
Thank you very much. I'll keep an eye on that because I hate rounded figures. Okay, if I can go to Councillor Pipe and then I'll come to Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to the previous slide where we're 21 homegrown social workers by 2025. Now, after four to 5 years training, what sort of guarantee that would we get that we actually keep them after? Oh, sorry. O'Leary uses it, Madam Chairman, and he throws it over there somewhere.
Because what he says is more important.
Because what he says is more important, obviously. And then he fell out of bed. Yeah. Right. It's nice to see that we've got 21 homegrown social workers on track to be becoming fully operational with us by 2025. But after 4 or 5 years training, what guarantee do we get that we actually keep them after investing a lot of time and money in them? And is there a rolling programme of more social workers being trained to give us even more? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I'm reminded of a great quote which says, but, you know, what if we invest in these people and they leave us? And the statement around, what if we don't invest in them? There's a real challenge, isn't there? You're right. You know, we can't keep people beyond, you know, I mean, really, even contractually 2 years. It's a real difficulty. But what we find and what we experience is that mostly they stay with us. We want to have that career pathway. It is crucial, these are often younger people on the beginning of their career, that we remain interesting to them, that we remain diverse and give them different opportunities, and that we remain competitive in the financial pay and scheme of opportunities they have. That's a constant challenge at the moment. You will all know that there are a number of local authorities in our midst that neighbour us who are in trouble and are on special measures, and that creates some pressures around the kind of pay schemes they may bring into place. What we know is that we really value our new recruits and we value those that we grow up and through with us. And many of them have come from a whole range of places. Some of them have been family workers previously. Some of them have been business support staff previously. They are committed to Dorset and we're incredibly grateful that they are and that they go through those journeys for training. We've been campaigning the DFE for some time to think about an apprenticeship scheme for social work. They have just announced that and we'll be part of the bidding for that to also make sure that we can access the funding from the Department of Education more nationally, because this is very much left to local authorities at the present time and we've absolutely been doing our part. I'm afraid not everybody has, and that has led to a little bit of a gap in the capacity and the availability of social workers nationally. So glad to see the Department of Education leaning into that space, and we'll make sure that we're accessing that funding if it becomes available.
Thank you. Could I go to Councillor Bartlett, please? And could I also ask, are there any other non-committee members who would like to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, Councillor Shane Bartlett, Wimborne Minster Ward member, and for transparency, the chairman of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Through you, Madam Chairman, I'd just like to congratulate Ms Levy and her team in Children's Services for what they've done so far, and the portfolio holder, Councillor Parry. It does seem that for a long, long time, Children's Services were in a difficult place, and it's quite enlightening to see such an ambitious strategy is being put in place now to bring children's services back into some sort of budget alignment. It's early days, I appreciate, but it is interesting to see what you've got planned over the next coming years. On page 32 at 21.1, it talks about savings proposals and additional income targets included within the budget proposals for summarised in the table below. And I noticed that in that table, in terms of additional income, there is nothing in the line for children's. So I was just wondering when this council authority made the bold decision to buy Coombe House, which has become the Dorset Centre of Excellence, there was discussions around being able to accommodate children then from out of county, and unfortunately being rather mercenary about it, but that's the way of the world these days, that there would be obviously an income from those children that would be accommodated at the new Dorset Centre of Excellence. I just wondered what the plans were for that. I was surprised to see that there isn't a forecast of an income that would be coming in from that. If those plans were still on course and online, and where we were actually going with that, it would just be interesting to know. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. So we are delighted that the Coombe House School has welcomed children into its doors, and those children are presently enjoying a good and rewarding education there. And the first priority for us around the Dorset Centre of Excellence was always about turning on those numbers of children in the school and keeping that focus with the company. And we continue to keep that focus into 2023, 2024. That doesn't mean that we won't be looking at continuing those opportunities that we identified previously, exactly as you say, around respite, residential, other short break activities, the activities around agricultural and horticultural opportunities there. But what we wanted to do was very much keep the focus of the company at the present time on getting those school places going. And as time comes by, I'm really hopeful and genuinely hopeful that and optimistic that we will see income lines come through within the company's accounts, but they obviously would be within the company's accounts, which would be to the benefit of Dorset children in terms of how that works through in terms of their business planning. But I think probably another time a good conversation about a revised business plan will come forward, and that will then detail that. But for this year, there's no income line in Dorset Council funds as a result of the Dorset Centre of Excellence position.
Okay, right. Are there any other questions on this part of the budget, on the children's services part of the budget? Thank you, Teresa.
Chair, I wonder if I might just share one further slide, which I forgot to do earlier, which was my error, which is around the Household Support Fund. And in fact, I'm going to ask Claire Shields, who's been coordinating this on behalf of the Council, just to say a little bit upon this matter, which I know will be really important for lots of colleagues.
Yeah, thank you. The Household Support Fund has been money that's been given to the Council to be able to fund and help with the cost of living pressures across Dorset. And we have been really clear around what our priorities have been and worked with partners and worked really closely with the cost of living group that Aidan chairs on behalf of the Council as well, and setting the priorities for that Household Support Fund. The new round went open yesterday, 9th of January, and has closed on the same day. So a big thanks to our partners in Citizens Advice in Dorset around managing the demand that's coming through the front door for that. So 1,300 applications through the door yesterday morning. So we are seeing the pressure within that and within our communities, and doing quite a lot of work together to be able to manage that. What is good news is that we have heard, and there has been an announcement that that funding is being extended. So we are just waiting for how much is coming through and when that will be open, so we can reopen that back for our communities. But thanks to Citizens Advice in Dorset and our voluntary sector partners for getting that message out there. We were really careful about how we communicated that. We led for a week when it was going to be open, so we were expecting that demand to come through. But it is big demand, and thanks to everybody that has been processing that. And a bit of thanks and patience from our residents to be able to get us through that big volume that comes through. It will get to you. We just need to take a bit of time to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm quite shocked and quite concerned, having spent yesterday afternoon pushing that out as far as I could to tell people that I'm going to get an awful lot of people coming back saying, is there any way, we will be getting additional funding for it. So if they are unable to access in this round, should I tell people to continue to apply?
Yeah, there'll be a clear message on the site around what that is. What we tend to do is hold the information for the people that have applied, and then we get in touch with them first to say it's coming and this is the date that it's coming, so that we can process that through. So as soon as we have the grant amount determined and get through the next one, we'll be in touch with people. But absolutely, there'll be good information goes onto the website. And please do keep contacting Citizens Advice in Dorset, because there are other funds and other mechanisms that we can use to support people as well in some of those hardship grants. And also they can give some really good advice, particularly around managing debt, which we know is one of the big contributors to some of these issues as well.
That is really useful, and I think we need to get this information out to councillors, because we're going to be inundated again, as we were last time. But I am glad they are going to be extending it. If you can keep us up to date on that, that would be really useful. Are there any other comments on children's services for the budget? Okay. Right, well, I think we've taken the children's service budget apart fairly well. And I think as a committee, I would say we're reasonably content. But we will be putting our feedback back to the Cabinet with our observations on this. That will be put together, I think I'm right in saying, George, in the next few days. And we'll get that sorted and attached onto the budget papers. I'm going to call a break now. Could I thank everybody who's been involved in this, first of all? I think it's really, really useful. And if anyone's got any further questions, if they could direct them directly to officers. I'm going to call a break of half an hour now. I don't know what the time is. If someone can...
12:15.
Okay, so if I can say we'll be back here for 1:45, please. Thank you for coming back. I think we're just about all here to start the afternoon session, which will be adult services, including housing and public health. If I can, first of all, just run a motion to extend the meeting. We've gone to 3 hours. So we therefore need to extend the meeting.
Jonathan Belinda.
Okay.
All in favour?
All in favour. Okay. I haven't at the moment put a time limit on it, but I would hope that we will get finished by probably 2:30-ish, something like that. But I think if we go much longer than about that, we'll have another vote as to what we're going to do, because it's a very long day. Okay, so we're on to adult services and housing, first of all. So if I can go to officers or Councillor Wharf for a very quick report.
As you told.
You have been asked. So if I could have a report, fairly briefish, and then we can go to the discussion with members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will stand up, A, because if I sit down, I cough, and B, because I think some of the acoustics in this building are pretty poor. So having the microphone to your mouth hopefully helps. So thank you for your time today. I'm genuinely very grateful, and I look forward to your input. This budget has been an incredibly challenging budget, which I wanted to thank very sincerely the officers for, in what has been massively changing times and some quite incredible challenges, most of which you're aware of. We had what's called a Budget Cafe 1 last week, which the public won't necessarily be aware of, so I don't intend to go through the detail of that, but I'm just going to cover a couple of points from that. There is, just so that I can talk about something that we're not going to talk about today, but it does happen to be quite instructive. You will have read, I think, in the newspapers over the weekend that the government's come up with a scheme of a variable amount of money, according to which newspaper or news outlet you read, to address the situation in hospitals and achieve greater discharge by moving people into care homes. I'm absolutely not going to discuss that for two reasons. One is it wasn't part of our construction of the budget, and the second is, as has happened on more than one occasion, the government makes an announcement over the weekend we haven't got any idea as to how it will be implemented or what our responsibility is. So forgive me, I'm just saying we're not going to discuss that, even though you might think it is particularly relevant to the moment. Excuse me. Over the last few years, we have managed to get, particularly this last year, a much better grip on the budget, and we have regular reviews, and we're managing to come in at a much closer to the original budget than we had previously. What we've also done over the last few years, over the last year, and I mentioned this as context, is we've developed and we are developing a 10-year plan which will come to Council, to Cabinet, in the next couple of months. And that 10-year plan is based around really 5 different areas, which I covered at the Budget Cafe 1, which are Home First Accelerator Programme, the Dorset Care Framework, the Operations Redesign, the Care Dorset, and apologies if that sounds slightly confusing, but Care Dorset is the company that we've set up to manage the care homes that were under Tricura that are ours, birth to settled adulthood, and accommodation with support, thinking about how we can help carers in accommodation, etc. Now, Vivian is going to cover most of the detail today, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. I'm not going to answer questions about Care Dorset because that's a different mechanism which we've got in the budget, and there are quarterly reviews of the shareholder committee which report on that. I can answer general questions but not specific questions, but I'm really looking forward to you giving this subject a deep bath and answering questions on it, and I hope that was brief enough for you, Chair. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you very much. Right. Are we ready then to go to the discussion on this, or is there additional? Sorry, okay. If we can go to Vivian, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a few slides which I will whiz through to give the background on adult social care. So Sam's going to drive them, so Sam, thank you. So the first slide, just for context really, this is an outline of the work that we do in adult social care and covers both the wider brief that we have and also our statutory responsibilities. We work with people, is the basis of everything that we do. We work with people in the places that they live, and primarily we work to keep people well in their own homes for as long as possible. And we are hugely dependent upon working with our partners to deliver this, both our health partners and our community partners and our providers. The aim of our service is very much to promote people's independence, to support people to live well, and that that means for all of us means about having a fulfilling life that has meaning and enables you to take part in your community. We support people at times of crisis and help them to regain their independence and recovery and well-being. That's a really important bit to help people get back on their feet again, to remain at home and to take part in their community and live a life without us or without health. Safeguarding and protecting people who are vulnerable, that's an absolute key role that we play and a very important role. The other absolute is that we create a vibrant provider market and that we ensure that we have the right care in the right places for people to support their needs and to make sure that we have both our prevention services and our crisis and acute services able to support people to get out of hospital or to go back to their own homes and to do this well and they're of good quality and that we have got a sustainable workforce to do that. The other focus, which I'm sure you'll be very aware of, is that one of our roles is to prevent admission to hospitals and also that we support people to be discharged from hospital. We do not do this on our own. That's very much part of our partnership and how we work with our health partners and the voluntary sector. So they're the key tenets of what we do in adult social care. The figures on the bottom of the slide
are just a number that was correct when we first showed this slide in the first Budget Cafe in November, which at the time showed that we supported 4,500 people, that we have people assessed is 1,800, and that we have, on top of that, we have 10,000 contacts on a daily basis. We are spending £30 on care for people. So that's just to give you an overview. We'll go further into the figures through the presentation and the questions, I'm sure, around social care, but I just wanted to give you some background to that. Of course, because of the growing demand and the growing need in adult social care, we have to have a framework to support people to deliver the care. And what this slide shows is just gives you an overview of our data and what that's telling us. So if I just pick a couple, because this is available in the slides, and it's also been available through the budget cafes, but it shows that the older people that we support, age 65 and over, by 2032 will rise by 23%. And within that group, people aged 85 will increase by 480 people a year. So as you all know, in Dorset, we have one of the highest groups of over 85 in the country. So that gives us a challenge, and it also gives us an opportunity to think about how we work with those individuals and how we value the input from the older people that we have in our community. Some of the other figures there you'll see are self-explanatory, but we've got learning disability in Dorset rising by 33% in the next 10 years. And likewise, we'll see a considerable rise in our mental health services that we need to deliver. We have a rising number of people that are living with dementia, sadly, and all of you will be aware that that's increasing considerably over the next 10 years. So that's all culminating in the fact that we will be seeing a rise in the demand on our home care services of around 38% over the next 10 years. And a 16% increase in the need for short-term community services such as reablement. I won't go through all of those points on that slide because I know time's short, but you'll see there that we are seeing an increase in the people coming through the hospital pathway, and I'll come back to that point a little bit later on, and we'll touch on the increase in the market that we will need, the extra increase in the market over the next 10 years, and the accommodation we touched on earlier throughout the presentations that we've had so far. But we have projections showing an increased need for accommodation for people requiring care. As an example, 189 extra care units are required to meet the demand as of today. So that gives you an idea of the increasing demand that we are planning for over the next 10 years. So quickly on to just an overview slide that I won't go into details on, but it shows that what we are doing to help transform adult social care during the next 10 years, because to do this well and to meet the demand, we cannot stand still, and we have to focus on our prevention agenda and our short-term demand agenda. Because where we need to be focusing, the main costs in the system are, of course, those people that are in crisis or have long-term demands. So we have to do the right thing, which is to focus on prevention and reablement and supporting people with tech to ensure that we've got the right services in the right places at a sustainable cost that then can take us to a place that we can manage both within the financial envelope, but also it allows us to look very productively at how we work across the system and with colleagues at supporting people to live well within the community. And those people that do need our support and care, that we're able to provide that either at home or in settings that are right for those people at the right time, and that they've got the right care and support around them. And that does mean that people have got the right opportunities in the care homes if they should need residential or nursing home, and they are fit for purpose. So we've got a real investment in making sure that we've got a good market, and it's a sustainable market that meets those needs and the workforce to meet that. And we talked about earlier on today about some of those enablers that are needed, one of which is a substantial focus on housing and accommodation. So moving on to our financial position. So our opening budget, as you'll see, after adjustments have been made, is 137,388,455 million. We adjusted that for the total pay, energy and inflation, which was around 11 million. As everybody's aware, you know, that's a fluctuating picture at the moment. And as a directorate, we then identified the cost pressures, which were close around to 8.1 million, of which we have subsequently received in December some grant funding, which Aidan mentioned earlier, part of which was the 7.1 million that we received in adult social care. And that's in the budget papers for a breakdown, but we can go through that. Part of the funding we received is the discharge funding grant, the adult social care grant, our percentage of that, which we shared with Children's, and we also received a grant for our market sustainability fair cost of care funding. And Dorset's funding from the discharge fund for 23-24 is 1.7 million. The social care grant is 8.9, and the market sustainability for Dorset is 3.9. The social care grant was shared between Children's and adults, so as we talked about earlier this morning, we got 4.4 million of that in adults. So I shall quickly move on to our areas of pressure. In 2021, Adult Social Care set out our 3-year financial strategy, and that was agreed. Indications that we showed at that point and came to this committee and Cabinet and full council showed that indications were that we would need a 7% year-on-year rise of the gross cost of care over the next 10 years. The increase in the cost of care for Dorset was forecast to be for 2023 was to be additional 10.3 million, which was reflected in our budgetary ask for 2023. The financial strategy took account of all the things I've talked about, which are the ageing population, rurality and workforce. So we can go into more detail on that should you wish to do so. Just to mention, as you see on this slide, since 2019 across the directorate, we have seen a significant increase in demand and cost. Over 30% increase in the number of people we're supporting and the cost of delivering their care. You know, that's a significant increase. We've seen an increase from hospital discharge, which we've talked about many times at this committee, which was almost a 3-fold rise of the people being discharged into and needing council care due to their higher acuity care needs, and as a result of waiting for health and support post-pandemic and since pre-pandemic. This cost has been around 15 million for the council compared to a cost that we had of 4.1 million in 2019. The need to support people with mental health and learning disabilities has also increased substantially. As you'll have heard constantly, and we've talked about often in this committee and at overview, that mental health has risen considerably and the need for mental health support is and continues to rise. Where we have seen that in adults is, you can see from the financial cost of the packages that we are having to put together, that there's been a rise from 492 in 2019 to a significant rise of 956 in 22. And that really is reflecting the complexity and acuity of people that we are supporting. As you can see from what we've presented, it's been a really another challenging year for adult social care. We're seeing, as the figure showed in the previous slide, we're seeing an increase in the greater demand for services from adult social care and also for information and guidance from adult social care colleagues. You know, these are tough economic times also for the care market, and although we have undertaken, as has every authority, undertaken the exercise of the fair cost of care, which we've started to implement in line with both the information that we have collected from providers, and we have paid for people delivering services. Alongside that, you know, there's we have got ourselves positively to a position of having met less 0 hours and moving into having contracts with our workforce, which gives security and also gives workforce retention. These measures all help and will build capacity and resilience, but we just will be completing the fair cost of care exercise on a regular basis to make sure it is in line with what the needs of our care providers are telling us. Adult social care has delivered 3.146 million savings to date, as we talked about previously in our budget cafes 1 and 2, with a further savings for this year of 859k by year end. This would mean from a 1.1 investment that was made for transformation, we have delivered almost 10 million over the last 2 years. So we have a good track record of delivering to our savings target and keeping, whilst looking at our transformation agenda that we have set out earlier in the slides today. What I'll share with you now are just the final slide before we go into questions, which is around our savings and efficiencies that we have identified to enable us to meet the target that we've been given of 6.2 million. I know I've taken up more time than 5 minutes, but I think they give you an insight into where our efficiencies and how they match against our transformation agenda, and also where we have looked to take savings from, which form very much part of our transformation agenda for adult social care. We are happy to take questions, and we've got Suzanne Wixie online if there's any particular questions on the operation side of the business. Thank you, Jane.
Well done. Well done. Your mic's not on.
The floor, please. Would you like to come in? Sorry.
I'm not a committee member, so do I have to wait my turn, or can I ask a question?
Jefferson, if I can take committee members first. Councillor Ridout.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that in-depth report on adult social care. Recruitment is obviously a big risk factor. Can you tell me what you're doing to try and keep your workforce loyal and recruit them? Are there any apprenticeship schemes going at the moment or for the future? Thank you.
Chair, I know that Suzanne Wixley wants to come in on this because she leads in this area. So I'll hand over to Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. So in terms of maintaining and sustainability for our workforce, we are aware of the difficult times that we're operating in at the moment, both from an operational perspective, but also sort of from a commissioning perspective as well with our workforce within care homes and within domiciliary care. We have a programme of work that we are delivering on to make sure that our frontline teams are supported, and in terms of recruitment and retention we have a strategy as well, and we are working with our frontline teams to enhance their working environment to support them through these difficult times. We are in a position sort of where we do have a number of vacancies, but again sort of we have put in place a centralised recruitment now. We are scheduling our interview panels throughout the year to reduce any delays in recruitment, and accepting CVs as well throughout the period of time in terms of supporting people who are interested in working for Dorset Council, and also sort of targeting new recruits through engagement sessions at universities and on informal and formal meetings that we are having. Also in terms of well-being, we are acutely aware of the impact, like with any frontline services, whether that's social care, children's services or health services, the impact that both COVID had on our frontline practitioners, but also in terms of how we support them with their well-being. And we have taken another number of measures alongside our HR business partner to make sure that we've got the right level of support in. So if I can just give you a few examples of that. You know, we have engaged a psychological health consultant who is actually working with 60 of our managers, promoting and supporting good mental health. We've also sort of worked on conflict training as well to make sure sort of that our frontline practitioners and managers are supported you know, during these difficult times. And we continue to offer resilience training for both frontline and non-frontline workers. And our senior leadership are committed to both recruitment and retention, but also sort of the well-being of our employees. And we have had a significant part in playing with engagement sessions with our staff last year, as we all went out on road shows, meeting with our employees, taking their feedback and putting into a plan what we need to do to support the workforce through 2023. We are also we do have, similar to children's, we do have trainee social workers in place. So we have 8 at the moment, 2 of which are due to qualify in March this year. We are looking at apprentice and apprenticeship levies as well, so that we do very well through that process. So we have a comprehensive response in terms of supporting our workforce and making sure that we encourage people to come into the social care system. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you. Any more questions at the moment? Okay, can I go to Councillor Jefferson, please? Jesperson, please. I do apologise.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hill Fortune, Upper Clarence Ward. First of all, can I thank the team for this presentation? The story that you're telling us here about the development of adult services is really very encouraging, and it does demonstrate that you're on it, you've got it, and Dorset Council is going to now be delivering a very much improved adult service in the coming years, and I'm very grateful I'm very pleased to hear about that. My question was specifically about the pressures. You described it on the slide talking about the pressures. You described them, the hospital discharge and the mental health pressures, being largely related to the pandemic. So the first part of my question is, I'm sure that you have a more detailed understanding of them than I've just played back to you. But does that suggest that perhaps these pressures are a spike and that we will not necessarily see the demands continue to rise at this level? And the second part of the same question, if I may, is that given where these pressures are arising, should some of this funding be coming from the health sector? And would you like to say a little bit about what we're doing to secure fundings from the NHS to meet some of these pressures? Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, it's a really good question. So I think the spike that you refer to and what we're seeing at the moment is partly a consequence of COVID and the pandemic, but it's also partly legacy of what was there previously. I think what we're seeing is that more people, due to the pandemic, have had to remain isolated and away from preventative services and some of those health services that maybe they would have accessed much earlier. And so what we're seeing, and our health colleagues would say the same, is what you're seeing is people coming into hospital who are really in need of acute and crisis intervention because they haven't had either that early intervention. So you've got some of the lower level people coming into hospital who previously would have had surgery, elective surgery on knees, hips, and very straightforward things, which has now meant that because they haven't had access to those health services, has meant that they are now hugely disabled by either pain or their mobility has been curtailed, and so therefore that's an added demand. So I think from a physical health perspective, I think that's what we're seeing. I think that will continue for some time, between the conversations that we're having across health and care. That's a 5-year legacy that we're looking at, and I don't see that changing that much. So that's why we absolutely are looking at a 10-year plan. The other element in mental health, I think, as we heard earlier in the presentation, that poor mental health has been exacerbated. I think in the adult world, we are seeing that people haven't been able to access, as with physical health, they haven't had the same access to the lower level supports that are available. And therefore, the people that we're now seeing at the crisis point and the intervention point where we need to step in are those people that are in that acute stage, and therefore their needs are much more difficult for them to live with, and therefore needing a higher level of support to enable them to live either in the community or to live in a specialist facility. I think it was there anyway, and we were seeing that increase, but I think the increase in costs that I referred to is an issue that we were seeing growing before the pandemic, but it has been exacerbated because of the pandemic. But I think it's a long spike. If it's a long tail of COVID that we're going to see, it's a 5 to 10 years. I'm sure John will want to come in on the funding, different elements of the funding. We've got a breakdown of that we can share with the committee, if that's helpful, as we share the slides around. But John will come in on the difference in funding. But I think as the announcements that were made at the weekend, I think you've heard that that Peter referred to, that there is funding for discharge going to be available. We have no idea how that's going to be spent through the NHS and what that will mean in terms of extra capacity and beds. We have had, as I said, we've had a number of grants through of over 7 million, the discharge grant, the social care grant and fair cost of care grant. And that has enabled us to, and will enable us to undertake most of the work that we need to do in this area. And it really supports our 10-year strategy, and it allows us to focus on that. But John will pick up some of the detail.
Hi, John Price. Hello, John Price, Corporate Director for Commissioning for Adults. So in this financial year, we have received some additional monies into both the local authorities and the ICB, so the wider system. And we're working to invest those funds into what we've called the Home First Accelerator programme. So that was part of the presentation that Vivian gave. This is quite significant because this is a programme that stretches over a number of years. So we talked about the tail of COVID being over a number of years. To fix some of the demand that's coming out of hospital, those numbers that we quoted, we need a medium to long-term plan. So that's what that is. We've been fortunate enough to get started on that this year, and we've already opened a series of reablement beds, which went live just before Christmas. So I think we received the money in November, and we were able to mobilise those really quickly, amongst other things. So we're making progress on addressing the immediate demand. There's a long way to go. This is considerable demand. If you look at those figures pre-pandemic, out of hospital and today, you know, a threefold increase is not insignificant. So managing that demand is key, but working together as a system, working with our colleagues across the integrated care system is quite key to delivering that. On top of that, as Vivian's referenced, we have now got funding for next year and the year after. So, you know, this is probably first occasion where we've had multiple years worth of funding. That's really, really important, because the way we invest that is through largely commissioned care. And in doing that and having longer term commissions, our providers are then able to employ people more permanently. So that starts to address one of the biggest issues in care at the moment, which is the turnover of staff. So in commissioned care, we lose around a third of the workforce each year. So giving a contract of employment, giving a long-term commitment is a really big first step towards that. In addition to that, obviously, we've referenced the work that we're doing around fair cost of care, which is paying better and paying people who deliver care better. So there's a commitment here through our market sustainability plan to continue to do that. But those things are very, very significant in trying to address some of this issue.
Is that okay? Okay. Councillor Rennie.
Yeah. Could I just explore a little bit further? I'm not going to ask because there's no detail behind the weekend's information, but I think I brought this up in the briefings about this earlier on. This increase in capacity for hospitals to be able to release people into care will mean the start point is greater, so more people are coming into hospital. So they'll be able to turn the beds around quicker, more people will have their surgery or have their interventions, but they in themselves will then be needing care. And you've talked about your 10-year plan, but in every time there is a change in anything, it brings a quick it's a bit like I talked about earlier on this morning within children, this partnership working, it always brings around a need for more of the triangle of help behind people. And it's occurring to me, we haven't got carers, and we haven't got enough carers. And it's the added impact this has on everyone else. for instance, we are one of the biggest employers in the county. If every one of our employers, or 1 in 5 of our employers, is required to not be able to come into work full time because they then have got some caring responsibilities. It occurred to me earlier on, because one of our councillors said I must be gone by, because there was a caring responsibility there. And even if you've got 2 adults in a household and with the children, if people are taken away to do more of that added care, how are somebody like us going to manage? You know, the fact that more people, if it's low-level care, you're going to be relying on family members to do that. Yet, they're in full-time work. Have we taken into account this wider responsibility? Because we already are running out of volunteers. And it worries me that throwing a quick fix to something has that added impact on us in various forms as a local authority, not just within adults and children's care, because some of those parents have got that responsibility as well. And is that added into this 10-year plan? You know, have we even thought about it as a local authority on the impact on our staff in every department, not just the ones that we're talking about today? Thank you.
I suppose it's a really relevant question in terms of how do we support people that have caring roles and also trying to balance a job in the community. I suppose that's why it's really important that we do have a strategy, that we do have a 10-year plan, that we've got a framework to work from, because there will the nature of the worlds that we work in are that we'll always get things thrown at us, that there'll always be a unforeseen demand that we've got to meet. So it's more important than ever that we do have a firm foundation to work from, and that we've got a strategy to manage our performance in adults and across housing, and that we've got a transformation plan. And I suppose the other element that is really important is the fact that that's why prevention and early intervention is so important, because if you can de-escalate some of those, if the possibility of somebody losing their independence and mobility in the first place, and support people not to need care or for their families to need to support them, then, that's the best outcome all round. So that's why we are absolutely, and with our health colleagues, I must say, looking at prevention and early intervention. But, workforce is an issue, and we need to constantly be looking at that in the widest possible sense, and looking at that across with our health colleagues as well. So we are doing some work across the ICB to look at how do we support our workforce as carers, and also to make sure that we understand the impact across the council on our own workforce colleagues who are in those caring roles. So it is a complex picture, but I would say in adults, what's really important is that we've got a framework that we therefore can start putting in place some of the prevention, early intervention areas of work that we need to do, so we can really focus on where we do need to have our workforce focused on a more acute settings and crises, that they're able to do that, and we've got the right skills to be able to do that.
Okay, can I just go on a little bit from that? I see that in your increases, you've got an increase in care market costs, which is very much linked to what you've just been talking about, and you've put just over 11.5 million in it. Is that enough? Is that going to be sufficient for this year, or are you anticipating having to come back and go into reserves to cover that? Once again, it does come down to whether you've actually got staff to pay, because if you haven't got staff to pay, you're actually going to end up with a saving if we're not careful. And it's the whole sort of around that budget, how that part of the budget and the request for the increased money has been put together.
Hello. So in terms of the 11 million, we've modelled that using the corporate calculation. So we believe that will be sufficient in line with all of the other budgets across the council. A lot of our work, a lot of our transformation is about shifting the lines of spend. And what I mean by that is over the last 3 years, due to the pandemic primarily, we've ended up putting a lot of people into bedded care. Bedded care is the most expensive type of care that we provide. So being able to shift our investment into the community, which our commissioning strategies look to do and our transformation work looks to do, we start to square some of those costs. So we believe that it is sufficient. We believe that the modelling we've done has been borne out to an extent through this year. But there's always things that can happen that are outside of our control that may change that. So I think we've got a good budget. We've done a lot of work in preparation for the budget, and we've been helped by some additional government grants, albeit at the last minute.
Thank you. That's really useful. Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to say, coming on to that last point about the fact, we're trying to do our best considering outside circumstances. I think that this budget, every budget we ever make is made or broken by adults. And I think that the team's done a very good job. I think the cabinet members done a very good job. And I think all this we do ever try and do with adult services is try and do the best we can given the circumstance we've got in Dorset. I mean, I was just looking, Wandsworth, which is one of the lowest council tax in the country, the average age is 34, and Dorset, which is always billed as one of the highest, is 48. I mean, the demographics of a county does have a major effect on the services we have to provide. I mean, we try and operate within a system. I mean, I'm going to be quite controversial. Care in the community, for instance, in my opinion, has been a dramatic failure, an expensive one. And we try, and as a council, and operate within a system that is set for us by a national level with constraints on the funding, what we can do. And I think the team's done a fantastic job this year, especially keeping it from the maximum increase. And I think that they need a congratulations.
Thank you. I'm not sure that needs an answer. I think that was an observation. Councillor Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'd echo that as well. Thanks very much for the efforts that are being made to maintain the level of services, in fact, improve them in some of the parts of the report I'm reading here. Particularly, I'm interested in 20.3 about the reablement services. I've always had a bit more of an interest in this over the years I've been involved in the local authority. I think it's an excellent programme in itself, and I see there's an expansion and acceleration here with help from the Better Care Fund. I'm not sure whether we've ever really made enough of this in terms of promoting it, what is available to people to live in their own homes when they're discharged from hospital. I'm not going to mention discharges because Peter said don't mention it, but you know what I'm talking about. Are we proposing to make more of it in terms of, if you like, promoting it so that more people are aware that they can get these aids to help them stay and live in their own homes and independent life? And also, the second part is a question. It may be me being ignorant, it probably is, but what is new bedded reablement service, please?
In answer to the first point, yes, we're expanding the service. So reablement's quite key in managing that out of hospital demand. So we will be investing significantly in that. Our reablement service sits within Care Dorset, which is the wholly owned company we set up this year. So we've got resource in there. We're going to be investing further in that service. And on top of that, what we've also done is introduce reablement beds this year. So as I mentioned, they went live before Christmas. So this is a new type of service that we're able to offer through Care Dorset, which follows the principles of reablement. So where we're looking to help people regain their health and independence to return home. So it's a big intervention. It's a big piece of our transformation plan. It will mean that more people who come out of hospital and who are in the community who might need to go into hospital will be referred to the service. So in the past, the limiting factor has been our capacity in that service. We're up in that, so that should flow through, and more people over next year and indeed this year will receive reablement.
Could I just explore that a little bit more, because I don't understand it the same as Councillor Cook has just said. Is this actually beds in a bedded ward, or is it a virtual ward, or how does it actually work? Where is it? What is it?
So the bedded reablement elements, yeah. So it is based in a care home environment, but with therapy. So people will receive a therapy-led assessment. They'll receive therapy whilst they're in that bed, with a view to them regaining their mobility or confidence to then return home, either straight from that reablement bed or via the community-based reablement service. So we've got two routes out. So in the past, you came out of hospital, you would have just got community-based reablement, if that was appropriate. If it wasn't appropriate, you may well have gone into a care home. In that care home, you may well not have left that care home because the reablement option was not there. So we're building a new service which should allow us to discharge more people back home. So that's the principle behind it.
To just continue that, so the new service, the reablement service, the physical, the equipment, will it then be a 9 to 5 or a 7 to 7 service, 7 days a week plus bank holidays? Because that also is part of an issue at the moment, is not able to get your equipment prior to you coming home. So there's that need for greater care for somebody if they come into the bed in their own home situation.
So reablement's always been a 7-day service in the community, but the equipment service has not been. So what we've recently done is change that, and working together with community-based reablement staff, we can start to align those two bits. Because you're right, equipment often is the end service that someone receives after receiving reablement.
I was just going to say, it strikes me as a little bit, and I'm sorry, this is probably tongue-in-cheek, but the new bedded reablement is probably what we used to call a convalescent home.
So it's a bit more than a convalescent home, but I take your point. Can I describe it in a somewhat simplistic way? And I can feel Vivian shrinking almost immediately. But the thing about reablement is, it leads to often increased costs in the short term, but decreased costs in the long term. Because if you apply reablement, which prepares people for a better life that requires less intervention, you can do that over frequently a relatively short period of time, and then they can move into a a care home setting that doesn't have those interventions or home. If you don't, you end up with interventions spread across the piece, and it is very, very inefficient. You may also remember that in November, I managed to squeeze out of our Section 151 officer that he would earmark some money to build a reablement centre, and that is part of our longer term plan. And the whole point is reablement helps us get people ready for a full and better contribution to life than they may be able to do when they leave hospital immediately. It's the right thing to do, but it costs money in the short term. But in the long term, it saves a very considerable amount of money, I believe, and it is better for all of the individuals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin wants to come back.
Do you want to come back?
I'd just like to say, Madam Chairman, I wasn't trying to make light of it. I do accept and agree fully with what Peter has said. We have always done this well, and I'm really pleased to see that we're putting more into it to improve it. But there were the one or two grey areas which I think we've had the answers to. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Right, can I go to Councillor Ridout, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In the preamble to the budget, it says setting of budgets around a set of principles, one being use best practices around business cases for decision making and will be open to invest and save opportunities. I'm just wondering, with adults, obviously there's a lot coming forward in the 10-year programme, and with reference to accommodation for recovery and reablement services, it said in Dorset Council-owned purpose-built recovery units, cost-effective housing supporting younger residents. Are we continually looking at our own Dorset Council assets for repurpose the buildings, etc., for all this coming forward? Thank you.
I think you've got a very uniformed yes to that. I mean, we've spent a lot of time this year modelling what the demand is going to be across, older people's housing, but also for people of working age, and have lots and lots of active conversations about, which bits of the council's assets we can utilise to take those forward. So yes, it's a big area. It's one of the key areas in the transformation plan.
Thank you. If I can go to Councillor Heatley now, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having me today. It kind of follows on from Councillor Ridout's question in that it's about making the council work together on things. I'm putting it here because we're talking about the single biggest budget. We've been talking about the children's and adults' budgets, which in total come to about 220 million, which is about 3/4 of what our council taxpayers pay us, and probably 5% of our residents directly benefit from that money. So we need to remember that context. We'll also be hearing later on this morning about the 4 million we propose to spend on housing. And when we get to Councillor Bartlett's committee, the 2.5 million that we are proposing to spend on subsidising public transport. 4 million is about of the 220 million on the two big programmes. The public transport subsidy is about 1/100th. So, I mean, I think we all understand why we are all in a position which I think most people at first sight would see as being pretty odd, with so much going in this direction. Now, I wouldn't want for a moment to suggest that we reduce our standards on the adult and children's programmes, but I do wonder whether some interventions around housing and around public transport in particular, maybe using some of their money, might help both sides. On adults, we are continually talking about keeping people independent and mobile at home. To do that, they have to have a suitable home. Many old people are living in homes too big for them, too cold for them, and they've perhaps lost the energy to move themselves to somewhere different. Perhaps we could help them. Perhaps there could be some kind of programme for moving people on into more appropriate accommodation. Similarly, their independence depends on transport, hugely on public transport. Similar things apply to children's services. We're talking about the priority on keeping families together. They'll only stay together if they've got somewhere to live. And they'll only stay together if they can travel to jobs and so on and so forth. Now, I'm just wondering whether we're doing enough to think about in the public transport and housing areas about supporting the major programmes, maybe with targeted interventions. It's not anything that's going to affect this budget, but it does seem to me that there's a whole agenda there that maybe we're not giving sufficient attention to. Thank you.
Sorry, there's some very interesting points around that. If I can go to Andrew, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just to come back a little briefly on that, whilst it's always a difficulty getting somebody who's lived in a, say, 3-bedroom house all their life to move on, we do work with our local housing associations, registered providers, and we met with Sovereign, for example, the other day, where they've got their own internal program to try to encourage or make it easier, frankly, for people to move into smaller, more appropriate properties, if that's the point you're making. So there are attempts to do it. It is always, frankly, people still have a choice. They can stay where they are, clearly, but Sovereign have had some success in making those moves to get people to a better accommodation.
Thank you. And I think just as a response as well on that, there's also the homeowners who may or may not want to move. And to me, the biggest problem is there's nowhere for them to go. We don't build bungalows anymore. We don't build the sort of houses that an old person would want to move into. There's very few bungalows with small gardens, but loads of land, if you see what I mean.
In the middle of the town. In
the middle of the town, that they don't need transport, that there's bus services for. That's just an observation, actually. I don't know, you're sort of looking as if you want to respond, but there's probably no response to that, because this is really down to developers rather than councils, although we can do things through the housing strategy, I would hope, when that comes forward. Have we got any more questions, please? Can I just, sorry, was that another question? Can I just explore a little bit about the 10-year plan and any timescales for that? Because although it probably won't impact on this year's budget, it will certainly impact on next year's. And if we get this right in place, we should have a good firm strategy going forward, so that we can make budget setting a lot easier and a lot more predictable.
The short answer is it will impact on next year. Some of the things we've started will have a positive impact and help deliver those lines of savings that we referenced. But more importantly, we will be bringing regular updates on progress through the cabinet process. So I think as we get into the next financial year, you'll see our delivery against those efficiencies line by line.
Okay, thank you. And the 10-year plan will be going through overview? Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Right, well, I think that has been a really useful exercise on adults and housing budgets. I think housing have got off really lightly this afternoon.
They've got a bit of a presentation.
Right, we're going on to housing in a minute. Yes. Okay, can I just check you've got everything you need, George? You okay? Okay. So thank you very much. And if we can then continue on to housing, please, that would be really useful. Thank you.
So the smallest budget, one of the smallest budgets, and one of the most important services that the council provides
Andrew Billings is going to take us through some slides first for your presentation, and then I'll pick it up afterwards. So I'll hand over to Andrew with the slides. Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. So if we can move on to the next slide, which I'll hover over briefly because it proves the point that Graham's made. We are actually relatively, certainly relative to the other two people directorates, very small budget. I will say before we go into the detail, what we do well here is factor in government grants and other areas of funding the work that we do. So I know we had an earlier discussion around a number of things, including housing standards and investment, and projects like the Healthy Homes Dorset scheme, for example, is a very key part of how we, for £1 of Dorset money, we'll lever in £7 of either external investment or benefits. So we do well on that small money, but it isn't the full, by no means the full picture. But it's a relatively small amount of money, and I'll go on what I'm spending my 5 minutes doing, because I think we had a good broad discussion earlier, is focusing on where our big spend, where our volatility lies, and that's in the mismatch between housing demand and housing supply, particularly around homelessness, people in acute housing need. So if people want to talk more broadly, happy to, but I think the budget pressures are mainly around that area. Next slide, please. So kicking off with pressures, of which there are many, and again, we touched on this earlier, our numbers, certainly this time from sort of December 22 compared to December 21, there's been a steady increase in the number of households presenting to us as homeless. That's risen by 30%, and we're running around 160 households per month are presenting as homeless, compared with around 120 this time last year. The other pressure, which in budget terms is our particular challenge, is the spiralling upwards of rental costs, particularly bed and breakfast fees that we have to pay, or that we have to pay above subsidy, above what we can get through housing benefit. That's gone up significantly, and there's a technical reason for that. Is that the benefit rates are frozen at 2011 local housing allowance rates, but I won't go into technical detail, but that means every increase is borne by the council and isn't picked up by benefits. So therefore, the bad news is the current spend for 22-23 is projected to be 5.2 million, so ahead of budget. And pretty much all of that upward pressure relates to the rising cost of bed and breakfast. And that's in a position where, if you look at our performance statistics, our bed and breakfast numbers have actually gone down this year. So the team have done fantastically well, given 30% more people are coming to the front door, and we're reducing the reliance on B&B, but it's still costing us a lot more. So it's paramount that we find alternatives to that use and prevent people needing it in the first place. So demand we expect to remain high and potentially rising further, given we need to analyse what is likely to happen around, say, energy support with energy bills tapering away, for example. That could well have an impact. But our plans are based on demand remaining at that high level. So pressures is about making sure we are on the right path. We strongly believe, we are confident we're on the right path towards ending the use of bed and breakfast accommodation over the next certainly by the end of 2020. Next 2 years. I can't get my gears right, but it's a 2.5 year plan. So we're still on trajectory, because the nature of Dorset's housing means that when somebody is homeless on a Friday at 4 o'clock, what we have available is bed and breakfast and hotels, and the shortage of our own provision and the provision in the private rented sector means we're overly reliant on that type, and it's costing a lot of money. So that's pressure, particularly budget-wise. So we do, in terms of the team, they do well, but the pressure is on to find alternatives and affordable temporary housing, but also permanent housing, particularly around working with the housing association sector, who do well, provide over 500 new homes a year, and get private landlords to provide their own lets to us, rather than to Airbnb and holiday lets. I'll squeeze in a brief statistics. We did a piece of work just analysing the number of 3-bedroom properties available, and more than 80% of those were available only to Airbnb and holiday lets. Less than 20% available for settled living. That's, if I'm being entirely frank with you, that's my biggest problem as housing director. It's not the housing associations. It's not that. It's the shortage of available housing for our people who come to us for help and assistance. But that's a large reason why that's where a lot of our focus lies. So moving on through this, I want to stress also in terms of pressures, the pressure is particularly on also within the team about preventing people needing us in the first place. So that very important work at that front door conversation about avoiding eviction, talking to the landlord, trying to get them to keep the tenant, keep on, stop mum and dad throwing the pregnant 21-year-old daughter out. Those kind of conversations are key. So that prevention piece is very important to the budget, because if we get it right at that stage, it doesn't cost us the money and it provides a better solution for that resident. So there are two things to raise, because this is very light on the other part of my job title, community safety. But the point I made before about bringing in funding, there are pressures around new government expectations, regulation and legislation around housing, but also community safety. A lot of that is, I'd say, very positive, certainly around providing new powers for housing standards, for example. It's a good thing, but it will cost. So that's the pressure about making sure we get the appropriate level of funding to deliver on government expectations, but also our own expectations around housing. And I thought it was very helpful for people to make the comments earlier, because we have high expectations here, don't we? So adding briefly the point about community safety, domestic abuse, serious violent crime, newish duties around domestic abuse, certainly a year, 18 months on. So we're doing well in picking up those new opportunities around the Domestic Abuse Act. But we've got another set of obligations around serious violent crime changes next year, for example. So that's another, in budget terms, under pressure, because we need to resource it appropriately. Next slide, please. It's the last one. Focusing on what we're going to do about it then, because we aren't sitting back thinking it's all too difficult, we can't do anything about it. We have very firm plans to resolve this. And we've alluded to the work around the housing strategy that will be coming back to members imminently. This is very much about making sure we have plans which fit our ambition but are realistic and deliverable. So the two things I'd focus on today around our plans in terms of budget pressures are prevention and finding housing. So that particular focus in our plans around making sure we prevent the need to come to us is key. And we've been successful in getting, levering in new money, for example, on the Rough Sleeper initiative, to stop it being necessary for people to be sleeping on the street, but also housed in temporary in emergency accommodation and moving them on into settled housing. So getting that prevention piece right is important. So finding temporary and permanent housing for people in need, again, we've touched on it before because it's an issue for across the people services, children's, adults, etc. We have to be slick and effective at finding the type of housing which is affordable and settled. I'd use the word settled rather than permanent, and making sure we do that in a number of ways. So keep on track with the affordable housing programme through housing associations. I've got people in my team like Paul Derry and Chris McDermott, who some of you may know, who their job, and they do very well, is making sure we get as much out of those housing associations as possible in terms of new housing. So and on being entirely blunt about this, we persuade them to work and focus on Dorset as opposed to going off with their eye elsewhere. So I think that's a very key strategic role that we perform. The more we get from them, the more we save on our budget, also relevant to this discussion. Third bullet point is around, in terms of our plans, is making sure we get our investment decisions right as well. As I say, a lot of that investment isn't necessarily using our money, but some of it is. Some of it will be about getting others to invest here and deliver those new affordable homes that I've just mentioned. but we're also looking on the back of I think a good successful start of being a registered provider ourselves as a council for the last year. We've had that status in order to bring in funding for the rough sleeper accommodation programme. We've acquired 46 homes to get people off the streets into settled housing. Very pleased with that, and it's an example of how there's some options around us looking at doing more of that where there isn't the capacity or willingness for other providers. So that's another area of how we invest well to save. Briefly give an example of the type of what I mean by that. It's not just bland words around invest to save. The rough sleeper accommodation programme, £59,000 average investment from Dorset in capital, delivers a home which pays back in about 6-7 years in rental income, and saves people being in bed and breakfast. So I think I could provide figures on that. It's good, solid commercial return for the council as well as a good home for a person. So we're looking at how we can do more within that space. One thing that's not mentioned in the slides, but I thought I'd give it a plug, is the work we do on empty homes as well. Is a part of the plan, is to do more to bring empty homes back into use. Some of that could be something and we're doing a scheme in Blandford, for example, the Plocks in Blandford, where we're bringing back a couple of a few properties that are now flats, which we will use for homelessness. But we're also doing work to bring back homes for other uses as well. So it could benefit on a number of fronts. Again, plans around making sure we continue to lever in money and funding from not just government, but use our registered provider status to get money in from Homes England to invest in the kind of options that get the best results for our residents. And I'll leave it there. So back to Graham, I think.
Thanks, Andrew. And just payback through rent. We've also got the capital growth of those assets that this council now owns. So that there's an extra bonus. But thanks for the quick summary of a wide range of work and challenges. I mean, I know, Jill, you'll be opening up for questions and comments. But as I said earlier this morning, we're working on a new housing strategy. The invites have gone out to the former members of the EAP who I worked with and worked with me for the housing allocations policy. So it's the same group because we're known to one another and we've done some good work. So we're working on that strategy and we're going to bring that forward. And of course, we'll bring that through and engage with members of Scrutiny when we've done some of that work more widely. It's to push forward delivering our statutory duties like homelessness and housing standards, but also it's to provide the best outcomes for residents who need our support in accessing houses. We need more homes from all fronts, as Andrew said, the private sector, social landlords, and from our own investment where necessary. We'll also need to find options to help people stay in homes that are already here. So an emphasis on good housing management, tenancy security and housing standards is really, really important for us. We'll also become Scrutiny in Cabinet and full Council over the course of the year to talk through our community safety plans, which I mentioned earlier this morning, and the support of our priorities and keeping Dorset safe, and to tackle important challenges such as domestic abuse, serious and violent crime, antisocial behaviour, drug-related crime and more. So I think for the moment that'll do me, Chair, and happy to take some questions.
Okay, I haven't got any hands up at the moment. Can I just ask a question? You've talked quite a lot about the council being a registered provider. Have we got any plans at the moment to set up a housing revenue account?
Take that one. Aidan.
Talk to Aidan. We haven't got that kind of scale, to be honest. I mean, I think it's something that councils with much larger stock would be in that position. So I'd say at this stage, without discussing with Aidan yet, I don't think it's necessary at this stage. But I think that there's a technical point to that, but there's also a point about how far we want to focus on housing with a pot of money. But I think it's too early to have that discussion. And the 46 properties is still relatively small.
I'll come back to it. And I mean, one of the things that was in the presentation, Jill, was about dusting off Homes Dorset. And I think that's going to give us another opportunity to do some creative stuff within the housing team.
I think this is where I'm coming from. Where's the capacity to increase the number of houses that we've got, or sorry, the number of properties that we've got, particularly bearing in mind the conversations that we had this morning and this afternoon about the need for housing just for our care workers and our social services people, etc.
Can I just come back to again, could give statistics. I mean, what we do is still going to be a relatively small proportion. 529 properties developed by housing associations last year. So getting more from them, getting more from, say, the health NHS are doing 60 flats in Dorchester, for example. So I think whilst there's not a single provider solution on this, so I think it's some we can do ourselves where there's a gap. But it's about, I think what we do well is but we need to do far more of is making sure we get everybody providing.
Okay, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from on that.
Got Councillor O'Leary and then
Councillor O'Leary, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think the main discussion members, I think, want to have obviously is around the housing strategy, and this is about the housing budget. And I think for a budget is this small, the service that is provided is very good value for money, and I think they do a fantastic job. A lot of obviously the housing responsibilities in this council is passed over to the housing association and registered providers, whether we like it or not. I mean, that is the fact. I often do wonder if Astra sold every house in the county, what power we'd have to stop them and what we would do in response, because there is nothing. I'm not saying that would happen, but I mean, Astra are currently selling off a number of properties in my ward, and I wonder, and I did mention it before to people, is could we not perhaps try and negotiate a deal where when registered providers sell off stock, could we perhaps look at getting first dibs, as it were, on that stock, if we are trying to increase the number of housing we're providing?
We do often ask them for first dibs, as you say. There many times that when they're going to dispose of properties, it's because the cost of bringing them up to standard is prohibitive. And I think it'd be fair to say that all of the RPs build an awful lot more than they sell off, and we do look to them to reinvest the money that when they've sold off it, work to reinvest in Dorset and not take it to outside the county. Thank you.
Would you like to come back? But we're going off a budget a little bit, so I'll just take one.
Like I say, it was only on that first dibs bit. The main thing is that the important thing about social housing is the fact that it's always built strong communities. And the problem is they sell off houses in established communities, then build new houses miles away, so you dilute what you had. And that was what the importance of trying to buy those houses in those existing areas. But
thank you. Councillor Orell, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a small budget compared to what we've been looking at today, and it looks like you're managing it very well, given the circumstances. It's very regrettable that you've only funded up to 2011 rates for B&B. That doesn't seem at all fair. It's probably more of a plea for the strategy that we look for Homes Dorset. Admittedly, it's a relatively small player, but this market needs some disruption, and we've been relying on the private sector now for 30 years, and it's been a bonanza for the landlords and the landowners, and a total disaster for public sector workers and the general public. So we need some disruption here. I think it's probably something like an analogy is like the Plaza Cinema in Dorchester. great low prices, and it forces the national ones to lower their prices to half what they are. We need the same here. We need a dynamic council aggressively providing houses 100 times more than we are now. And then the other provider markets will fall in line and offer better value to the public, and therefore we'll be able to run our care services and our hospitals. So look, you're doing a great job, but we're really great to see more in the coming years. Thanks.
Any comments in response? Okay. Noted. I hate that word. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I think, what can we do to help you as councillors? You talked about your biggest issue now is Airbnb and holiday homes. Some Airbnbs are bought up very quickly. They're town centre properties, they're ex-offices, ex-shops. They're bought very quickly and changed into Airbnbs in the places where we need to have some accommodation. You must have had some thoughts around what could we, and it's not quite with the budget, but there needs to be budget somewhere, perhaps for us to be buying and using our empty home strategy to be able to buy and then be able to rent them out ourselves. Yeah?
I mean, yes, obviously things like that are going to come forward through the strategy. But the bottom line is, I'm going to look over my right shoulder, looking at Aidan and going, you need that money in that pot to be able to be fleet of foot like everybody else. Now, we as an authority, I'm afraid, we do like to wade through porridge and make life really, really difficult, and the wheels of local government that grind slowly. And we need that pot of money so that we can be in the same bidding room as all the other boys, because that's the problem that we've got, is we're behind that curve, and that's why we need that a pot of money to be able to be slight of foot when we need to be.
Can I just add a thing, Molly, as well? 'Cause I think you asked what you could do to help. I think just that email that's gone out to members around the housing strategy is precisely this kind of input. We need that. We need to be able to reflect on some of this, because part of it is slightly different tangent to Graham's point, is about working with those property owners to persuade them to use it for more settled accommodation. I think that would probably be the big, that would be the more substantial win, because that's what, as I tried to put across earlier, that's the particular shift in recent years that's hurting us. There isn't that settled housing option in the private rented sector.
Thank you. If I can go to Councillor Flower, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The topic of social housing, regardless of where it's provided from, either through allocations through commercial building or through RSLs and so on, is a topic that doesn't relate to today's issue. We should get back to the budget. It's a good topic and it's one we need to develop going forward, but it's not for today.
Thank you for your comments. I'd rather hear it here, though, than at Cabinet. Just coming back on the fleet of foot that Councillor Carr-Jones has referred to, how can we improve that? Because that certainly is a budget question, because I have known within other councils that housing, etc., can be bought extremely quickly because they've set the budgets up in such a way that there's authority for people to spend.
Yeah. Do you want? Shall I start? So some people's thick porridge is other people's good governance, isn't it? Depends on your perspective. I think yes, we need to be agile, and I think as a council we're trying to get there. And I think we have got some good examples in housing where we've got. In particular, recent government grant funding where we were able to respond very quickly to housing opportunities that come up on the market and respond very quickly. So we have got some good examples. I think in particular what we're describing here, I think as part of our capital programme, is having a generic capital budget and amount set aside for housing and delegated to the housing team. And I think that's certainly something we're looking to explore and look to bring forward. We've got a paper coming on capital to February's cabinet, and I think that'll be an opportunity to sort of outline that sort of approach there.
Thank you. That's very useful. Could I go over to Councillor Bartlett, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And at the risk of upsetting the leader, I'm afraid I am going to have to make a comment. And I agree that there's potentially slightly getting off topic here, but I think the clear message is coming through from those members that are here, and I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor O'Leary, with Councillor Orrell, and with Councillor Graham Carr-Jones, and with the comments previously made by Councillor Heatley. And the fact is that the baseline of all our ills within this council authority and with our residents of this county is housing. We have got to sort out our housing issue, and we've walked into this for decades. And the reason I'm making the comment here now to back up my fellow colleagues and what they've said so far is the fact that we need to make a clear and concise message within our report back to Cabinet that we need to have a better understanding around housing, the provision that we need for our residents in Dorset. And it's going to take some blue sky thinking and some thinking outside of the box to be able to achieve that. But we cannot come back into this chamber in 2024 and be in the same position. We need a clear and concise strategy of how we are going to get ourselves out of this hole. We are losing between 30 and 40% of young people and children out of this county. You've heard me say this many times. We cannot continue at this pace and be a council authority that is master of its own destiny and knows where it's going. It's not sustainable to have that difference in demographic population. And we need to really give that some serious consideration now. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. Councillor Flower.
Again, well, we'll comment on this, but it isn't part of today's discussions. Part of the change to the government's methodology on planning will deal with the issues about viability. We see many of us anybody who's on a planning committee will know, and Shane is on a planning committee, will know that developers can use the opportunity for viability and challenge the provision of affordable housing to rent. And they win very often. They use the spreadsheet, and it's a way of it, but there's no provision. And there will be a provision in the new legislation, I believe, that helps local authorities when they're framing their local plan, bearing in mind it's all got to be based on policy. And I've said this in this chamber before now, that part of the aspirations we got for our plan is to make sure we got provision for housing for local people. And this is it's a mixed economy. There isn't just one strand for us to deliver the levels of housing we know we need. But Shane makes a good point. This isn't a debate for another day, Chairman. I take it very seriously. I think it's one that we do need to ensure that when it comes to Cabinet, we have a really good understanding about what all the options are to achieve the aspirations that he's eloquently set out.
Thank you. And I must admit, I'm really looking forward to the work on the housing strategy, because I think that'll be key to a lot of the questions that we've been asking today around housing. Are there any other budgetary questions on housing, please? Councillor Ridout.
Thank you, Chairman. On homelessness, 30% increase in homelessness from 121 to 160 per month. I find that really scary. So I assume that includes refugees, asylum seekers. I'm unsure about that. And I guess the cost of living crisis is having an impact. But I'm wondering on the projected figures going forward for this year and further years, if there's a thought that this might ease or it's going to get worse. And will the 500, I think it's 500,000 per year, an additional 500,000 per year to prevent homelessness, is that going to cover these costs? Thank you.
Just to clarify, the headline figure is about 160. It doesn't include asylum seekers or refugee cohorts. And that's people who present to us as being homeless or at risk of homelessness. We actually prevent people sometimes by having that thing I explained, by talking to the landlord, stopping the eviction, getting the mum and dad to take them back, etc. So it isn't everybody, not all of those numbers come into bed and breakfast or temporary. A lot do, but that's what that figure particularly means. We're working out plans at the moment. That's the line in the presentation was about reconfiguring our plan to get out of bed and breakfast. We're looking at the moment at figures around how we shift some of that investment earlier to make sure we get on top of that rise in demand and still push on to get out of that usage of bed and breakfast, because that's £1.5 million at least and rising. That we're losing on bed and breakfast. You'll see those, and that's if we get that balance right, that a little bit of investment in prevention and finding right accommodation will pay back. And it's not overly bold statement. That is something that's very much part of our plans. But we've just got to take account of the fact that the number of people coming to us has risen.
Okay. Right. I think we're at the end of the section on housing, and I'd like to thank officers for their time and their input, and also Councillor Carr-Jones for his input. It's been really, really useful. Have you got everything you need on that, George? Are you okay? Okay. So if we can now move on to the last part of this budget for today, which is a really small part. I don't think we've got a presentation for it. Have we? We have got a presentation for it. A short presentation. Is that online? Okay. So I'd like to move over to public health now. So if I can move to public health, Dorset, for a presentation. Thank you.
Forgive me if I don't stand up, I just cough and you wouldn't want to hear me do that all the time. Sorry. First of all, can I introduce to my left Dr. Jane Horn, who is going to speak to this paper. This sounds a bit like an Oscars ceremony. Sam Crowe, unfortunately, can't be with us today, but he is here virtually, I hope. Is it possible, George, that I just test if Sam is here? No, he's not. In that case, Sam can't be with us today in any form. So apologies about that. So this is a £26 million budget, so this is non-trivial, and it's one that people tend to be, let's say, least well informed about. So I think it's important you get the general gist of it. So this is going to would normally be presented by Sam Crowe, the Director of Public Health, and Dr. Jane Horn can introduce herself when she comes to it, but she will be more than capable of describing the budget and the issues associated with it. This is slightly different, and apologies, I said this to all members some time ago, but as this is a different meeting, I shall say it again. It's a service that is shared with Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, so the budget is built up with a contribution from central government, which is divided between the councils according to a funding formula. So the funding comes to us in the form of a ring-fenced grant that can only be used to provide services to improve public health outcomes, and that restriction is the same for BCP as it is for us. So Jane is going to talk about the service today, which not only supports residents in the Dorset Council area, but much of the budget is used to commission pan-Dorset services, including serving BCP Council residents. So this does have a degree of complication because some of it's for us and some of it is for Dorset Council as a whole, for Dorset as a whole, apologies for that, and I'll leave to Jane to talk about that. And I would just point out that Sam is in the unenviable position, it's not a problem, but it's a challenge, where he works for two different people. I've done that myself. It's called matrix management, but it does present a series of challenges. So Sam works for the chief executive here and one of the executive directors in BCP. So he has two masters to meet, which is always, a challenge, but Sam does that, I think, really, really well. I'm very pleased with that. Sorry. There is also a series of grants. Excuse me, my screen has just gone completely blank. Oh, well, there you are. My backup screen. It's now trying to recognise my face. Forgive me. And it's saying that's the ugliest face I've seen for quite some time. So the last thing I wanted to say is that there are a number of grants, including grants for things like cessation of smoking, excuse me, in hospitals. And for example, that costs Dorset as a whole 8.7 million in any year. So this is a non-insignificant issue that we need to address. There are a number of different other prevention measures that are being addressed by this particular organisation, which, although it reports to us, nevertheless is a bifurcated being, and much of its information is reported to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which again is slightly separate from our overview. So the whole thing is not deliberately, but it can appear a bit opaque, not intentionally. So I'm very keen that you, as a scrutiny committee, give this your full attention. That's not meant to sound in any way patronising, because it doesn't always get its full attention, and it's a really important part of our process. Thank you very much. And if I may, I'll hand over to Jane.
Thank you. So as Councillor Wolf has said, we are a shared service and we're funded through contributions from each local authority. Each local authority gets its own ring-fence grant. The ring-fence grant allocations are not announced at the same time as the other local government settlement information. So we currently do not know what our allocation will be for the next financial year, but we are expecting, hopefully, that we will get that this month. Having said that, in the last few years, we haven't been successful in getting it until rather later in the year. At the moment, our current assumption is that the grant to each local authority will remain unchanged. There is some national discussion that there may be a 1% uplift. I know a number of organisations have been arguing for a higher uplift, but I think based on national situation, we're assuming at the moment that it will remain unchanged. And given that the ring-fence grants to each local authority will remain unchanged, our assumption for the shared service is that the contributions will remain the same as they did last year, which you can see in the slide there. If there is going to be a 1% uplift, that would mean an increase in Dorset Council grant of 146k. And given the governance arrangements around how the shared service works, there would be a decision at the Joint Public Health Board on how any uplift is used. Next slide, please. So this is just very briefly my last slide, because I know that you wanted us to be quite brief about this. Thank you. So our opening budget is 25.6 million. We have a number of pressures, which includes internal pressures within the team. So the pay award increments and other central adjustments that are required for the operational costs of the team within the shared service. And then the other pressures, which are predominantly within our commission services. We commission a number of public health services, as Councillor Wolf has said. So that's where our pressures are, and they come to a total of 1.2 million. In terms of our savings, planned savings, we have, again, as Councillor Wolf has said, we have a number of income targets for additional grants outside of the public health ring-fence grant. So the work around smoking cessation in hospitals, for example, is a grant that comes into Dorset ICS. It's an allocation from NHS England for treating tobacco dependency, and previously they've handed that to us to manage alongside other smoking cessation budgets. And we are, again, anticipating that those similar grants will be coming in next year. So we have an income target which will support transformation around smoking cessation and other lifestyle services. That, as we've said, 8.7 million of the predominantly adult social care costs are thought to be attributed to smoking. So obviously any work to reduce smoking will have an impact. Some of that is actually quite a short-term impact potentially. The cost of a social care package for a smoker is thought to be 4 times higher than that for an ex-smoker. So if you can get people to quit, potentially you're making savings quite quickly. We've also got some savings targets which are more small scale, but around linked to some of the transformation work that we're doing with the council as one team. And then there are some other savings targets around how we manage our contracts and contain costs within the contract. So the total savings there come nicely to 1.2 million, and so our proposed budget would be 25.6 million, the same as our opening budget. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Could I have questions, please? I have a question. If you do get the 1% uplift, what are you going to use it for?
I think we're just looking at that at the moment as to how we might use that, or whether, it's for the Joint Public Health Board, but it would be, the options are that we use it within the shared service, or that the local authorities retain that money. So that is a discussion we still need to have. And if we were to use that, we would be looking to put that into existing services and building those up, I think.
Other questions? I've got no hands up at the moment. Any questions? I think we're happy with your budget. I'm sorry I haven't got a string of questions for you. Right, so thank you very much for that, and I'll move on. Can I just check with George? George, have we got all the information we need to go forward with this? Right, so that concludes our discussion on the budget. Our next item is 12, which is exempt business. There is no exempt business, so if I can call a meeting to an end, and I don't know what the time is, and just thank you and all the officers, all the members who've come today, and thank you for your input. It's very much appreciated, and we'll go forward to Councillor Bartlett's committee on Thursday, and then on to Cabinet and full council. Thank you.